All right, Suzanne, we're ready if you are. All right, thanks. All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to call to order Tuesday, August 22nd, 2023, Bridgewater Township Zoning Board of Adjustment. Regular meeting, both adequate and electronic notice of this meeting specifying the time, place, and manner in which such notice was provided in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-6. Specifically, on April 19th, 2023, proper notice was sent to the Courier News and the Star Ledger and filed with the clerk at the Township of Bridgewater and posted on the bulletin board of the municipal building. Please be aware of the Zoning Board of Adjustment policy for public hearings. No new application will be heard after 9:30 p.m. and no new testimony will be taken after 10 p.m. If you're able, please rise for the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, good evening, Roger. If we can get a roll call, please. Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. Here. Here.
Here.
All right, thanks, Roger. At this time, I'm going to open up the meeting to members of the public that would like to speak on any land use issue which is not on our agenda this evening. All right, seeing none, I'm going to close that portion of the meeting, and we're going to move on to minutes for approval. And with the board's permission, I'd like to break this up into two pieces to kind of get it moved faster. The first one let's put forward is December 21st, 2021, our regular meeting. And looking for changes, comments, and a motion.
I had none, I move.
All right, I know Mrs. Amin had some comments. You're going to work with Joanne and Roger to get them fixed up?
Yeah, for the December 21st, I don't have any comments.
Great.
Only comment I had was add page numbers, which I had told Joanne, and she did that. So that's all I have for this particular one. So
I'll look for a motion, please.
no comments.
All right, that was Mr. Widley. Second. That was Mr. Bongiorno. Roll call vote. Yes.
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 Yes. All right, thank you. And then we can block up January 18th, 2022, February 1st, 2022, February 15th, 2022, and March 1st, 2022. And Roger, I have Foose, Wadelli, Sweeney, Amin, Bongiorno, and Kulak, all at those meetings and all eligible to vote. Great. Changes, comments?
I have in my packet, January 17th, 2023, two different copies of stuff.
Yes, that was the reorg and the regular meeting, and they've been since grouped back together, and that's going to be one set of minutes.
Okay, so I'm not hallucinating. Okay,
You're not hallucinating.
thank you.
All right, changes?
I move based on the changes you wanted.
All right, Mrs. Amin, you're going to work on changes with Joanne?
Yeah, a few typos here and there. I'll work with Roger and I'll give him the changes.
Thanks.
Yes, I'll do that.
Minutes and the resolutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Do I have a second, please? Mr. Bongiorno? Yes.
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 All right, for our minutes. We have one resolution, that was the Karub. The address is 15 Crest Drive. Changes, comments, please.
I had none.
Mrs. Amin pointed out two small typos on the top of page 2. Proposes should be proposed, and at the top of page 3, or I'm sorry, bottom of 3 in paragraph 12, his is there. Otherwise, I think we're good.
Good. Motion, please.
I move.
Second.
Second, Mr. Lespiza. Mr. Widley. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
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 All right. We're going to move on to our applications, but before we do that, we're going to do a quick update on T-Mobile. And Roger, about a week ago, was kind enough, as our zoning officer, to send me some pictures of the Washington Valley Martinsville Fire Company, which showed that the temporary tower has been removed, hurrah. And the condition of the fire company, Roger, in your opinion, did it meet the criteria which the board requested T-Mobile the night of our last hearing?
Yes, sir. There was no equipment on site. It was cleaned up, and as you can see by the pictures, took down, no equipment as well.
Great. Let's get these down, everybody.
I saw no issue.
All right, I visited the site, and I agree with you, Roger. They did a nice job. And they were a day early? Or they were a day early, I believe.
I was there on the 15th.
All right.
The deadline.
Well, thank you for going out there, and thank you for keeping the board's word and keeping T-Mobile in check. I do appreciate you going out there.
Yeah, thank you, Roger.
Does anyone have any questions on the T-Mobile update? The pictures that our zoning officer has submitted? Everybody's good? All right, great. We're going to move on, and we're going to have Somerville Lumber Company. Mr. Silver, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, and Mr. Flair.
Mr. Chairman, it's time in my career for me to pass the baton, but I'm going to sit second chair just to make sure he doesn't do anything I wouldn't do.
So this is like Michael Jordan taking the bench.
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough. Good seeing you.
So, Mr. Silbert, before you get too far into doing any opening, I thought I'd just spend a minute, just talk to the board. And the Section 68 case isn't the normal planning board case, although, as the board would remember, we happened to have one about 2 months ago for that used car dealership. That was a Section 68 case. So procedurally, it's the same. The applicant's going to put on witnesses and establish what they are trying to get you to say yes to. So their particular application is an appeal of the zoning officer's determination to deny a zoning permit, which they simultaneously filed for when they filed for a certificate of nonconformity for this particular property. Right? The zoning officer indicated in his opinion that the warehouse use on the property was an accessory use to the retail use as a lumber yard, and that the retail was primary and the warehouse was accessory. The applicant is appealing to you saying, hey, you know what, the warehousing is really the primary use and the driving factor in a lumber yard, and the retail just kind of came along with it as an accessory use, okay? So they're going to present some witnesses today that will sort of back up what they're saying. It's a certificate of nonconformity under Section 68 can be issued by this board. It can also be issued by the zoning officer within the first year of when a zoning ordinance was changed to make something no longer permitted in the zone. They did actually make that application within the first year, and they are entitled to a certificate of nonconformity as a matter of law as to what's legally existing on the property at the time the ordinance changed. Okay. So
Appreciate that.
I don't want to prove your case for you or disprove it, so I'm going to let you
I was
do
going to
it
go
from
through
there.
all of that. Still
Okay.
might.
Just real quick, we all got this Doyle Burr memo dated July 28, 2023. We got it very late in the day, and I'm sure you got it even later. So first, I want to apologize on behalf of the board, but second, I want to give you the opportunity, if you want to review it, if you want to take a recess, if you want to take some time, by all means, you're entitled to it. I want to make sure that you're comfortable with us proceeding because we got it late, and I know you got it late as well.
Right. Yeah, we got it I'm sure, the same time that you got it, and we reviewed it. And I think the presentation that we prepared addresses most of the points raised in this memo. So I think we're ready to go forward this evening.
All right,
And,
then we're good.
yeah. All right. Well, just for the record, I'll just introduce myself to the board. My name is Michael Silbert, and I'm an associate attorney at the law firm D. Francesco Bateman,
And
located.
Mr. Silbert, before you even do anything further, let me just confirm with the board that we do have jurisdiction, that the application was properly noticed
Absolutely.
to homeowners or property owners within 200 feet, and it was published on time in proper form, so the board has jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Yep. So, the board's aware, I'm an attorney at D. Francesco Bateman, located in Warren Township, New Jersey, and I'm joined by a member of the firm and my colleague, Mr. Jeff Lair. And we have the responsibility of representing the appellant this evening, Somerville Lumber Company. This is actually an appeal pursuant to Section 70A, 72, and 74 of the Municipal Land Use Law for the purpose of appealing a decision issued by the township's zoning officer with respect to an application submitted by the appellant for a certification of nonconformity. And as Mr. Oler had stated, this certificate of nonconformity is pursuant to Section 68 of the MLUL. I might refer to this also as a Section 68 certification. So before I get into the specifics of this appeal, I wanted to provide a bit of background information on how we arrived here. So in April 2023, as Mr. Oler had stated, the appellant submitted a nonconformity application to the township zoning officer to certify that the appellant and the property had vested rights to principal warehouse uses and structures, as well as those uses customarily incidental to warehouse uses on property located at lots 2, 3, and 4 in Block 234. Such rights having pre-existed the adoption of the ordinance, which this board knows all too well and is very much familiar with, ordinance number 22-30, which amended the Bridgewater Township's land use ordinances, and that amendment resulted in the prohibition of warehouse uses in the M1C zone, the zone in which the subject property is located. So, as Mr. Oler stated, it's very rare that a zoning board hears a Section 68 application, but it does happen. But those usually go directly to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. It's very rare, or even rarer, for those types of applications to go to the zoning officer. But since the appellant sought a Section 68 certification within 1 year of the adoption of that ordinance I had referenced, ordinance 22-30, the appellant was afforded with an opportunity to seek a certificate of nonconformity directly from the township zoning officer. The appellant's Section 68 application was also accompanied by a zoning permit application for a prospective warehouse tenant that was going to lease a substantial amount of space that was formerly occupied by our client, Somerville Lumber Company. The Section 68 application was denied by the township zoning officer, Mr. Dornberrier, in a letter dated May 11th, 2023, which was then distributed to the appellant the next day on May 12th. And the reason for the denial was that it was determined by the township zoning officer that the principal use on the subject property was not a warehouse use, but instead it was a retail use, and the appellant would not be entitled to a certification of nonconformity. As a result of the denial with respect to the Section 68 application, the zoning permit application for the warehouse tenant was also denied, since warehousing is no longer a permitted use in the M1C zone, without a certificate of nonconformity, which we're all familiar with this term, would have grandfathered the use in for the appellant's property. So essentially, it was determined that a tenant that principally engages in warehousing would not be permitted as of right to operate on the appellant's property. So just a few things with respect to that zoning permit application, just so the board's aware of what we initially came in with. So the tenant that was going to lease the property, the tenant was going to lease it in its current condition, wasn't going to make any improvements to the property that would constitute what is known in the legal land use context as a intensification of a pre-existing non-conforming use. So if any tenant in the future wished to make changes to the property that would result in an intensification of the existing warehouse use, for an example, the tenant, if for example the tenant wanted to increase the number of loading docks on the property, the appellant or the potential tenant, as a matter of law, would have to return back before this board and seek what is known as D2 use variance relief to permit an intensification of the pre-existing non-conforming warehouse use. And that is really going towards any improvements that would be characterized as intensification of that use. It wouldn't involve tenant fit-ups or your standard type of renovations that are made for a space if a tenant's going to occupy the space. But basically, I'm highlighting this point because I want the board to be aware and feel comfortable in knowing that should the appellant be granted a Section 68 certification this evening, the appellant must return before this board if they wish to make certain types of changes to the property. So this certificate we're seeking is not carte blanche approval for the appellant to then go ahead and do whatever they wish with their property. They still have to work within the confines of the MLUL, and I think this should serve as some level of assurance to the board that the appellant is really only seeking certification to permit the type and scope of use that has always existed on the property and really nothing more, at least this evening. I've prepared, along with Mr. Lair, a presentation that I'd like to present to the board to just further familiarize the board with the Section 68 certification process, as well as the legal differences between principal uses and accessory uses, since that seems to be the point of controversy here. But before I start the presentation, well, actually, I'll go through. I also have, in addition to the presentation, I have 4 witnesses that I'd like to present to the board. First, I intend to call Mr. Paul Pettit, who worked for some of a lumber company for over 4 decades. My second witness, the board is probably familiar with Mr. Dominic Caruso. Mr. Caruso is a well-known and reputable builder and a lifelong resident of Bridgewater Township, and he's going to provide witness testimony with respect to his long-lasting business relationship with Somerville Lumber. My third witness is Mr. Jonathan Glick, who was retained by Somerville Lumber a number of years ago to lease and market the subject property, and I'll see when we call him, I might ask to qualify him as an expert in the field of real estate brokerage, specifically relating to industrial real estate, but I'm not sure if that's necessary at this moment. And my last witness is someone else that the board's familiar with, Mr. Jim Kyle, professional planner. I think we felt that it would be helpful for the board and for Mr. Kyle to listen to the testimony presented this evening and then provide his professional planning perspective to the board in light of the testimony provided by the other witnesses. So before I go to the presentation, there's one last thing I wanted to say before I begin. So while the appellant respectfully disagrees with Mr. Dornbarrier's denial, there's an old adage which is found in the Cox book, which is our land use Bible, that says, to doubt is to deny. So in short, zoning officers are expected to refuse to issue any permit or certification where there is any doubt whatsoever for what the applicant is seeking. And this has always been the general rule, that if there's any doubt in the zoning officer's mind, that the matter should then proceed forward to the zoning board so that the zoning board can hear testimony and hear evidence presented at a public hearing to be better informed in order to render a decision. I say this because 2 things can be true at once. If Mr. Dornbarrier, which he clearly did, expressed doubts, he was right to deny the Section 68 certification and the zoning permit application that accompanied with it. But at the same time, it can also be true that the principal use on the property was, in fact, a warehouse use, and as such, that the appellant would be entitled to the certificate of nonconformity. So if it's okay, I'd like to kind of go through this presentation.
Just real quick, let me just get on the record now. We're on YouTube, so we're broadcasting to the world, so people that are bored at home can watch our meetings and enjoy what happens in Bridgewater, New Jersey. But it's important that they're not going to see what is in front of you, but what they can see on bridgewaternj.gov, if they go to tonight's agenda, there's a blue link with all the documents and hopefully everything you're going to have here tonight, they're going to be able to see via that link. If you could just, as you go through your presentation, just refer to each document, kind of give it an identifier, a marking.
Got it.
And so people can, know when you're switching at home and basically know what you're talking about, and hopefully they can follow along and understand what's happening tonight.
Got it. So if we can, Mr. Oler, if we want to mark this as A1, it's
The A1 with today's date, do we have a copy of that already?
I sent a copy to Ms. Ricks, so there should be a copy.
Do we have a digital copy?
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a hard copy we can mark too?
We can. I'll just give you a hard copy that I have here. I printed one.
Thank you.
And the board is able to see, we have updated screens all in front of us, so we're able to see as you go through.
But for the benefit of the public, I will announce I'm changing pages.
Yeah, and I want to thank Ms. Mader for getting us online, and looks great. And
Thank you.
And this is the first time we've been able to use this technology, so go easy on us.
I will. So this is the first time as an attorney I'm really using, making a presentation like this before a board. Usually you have an engineer or architect doing this, so it's a little unorthodox, but I think that
And I
this
just
type
want
of-
to advise the board that this is part of Mr. Silbert's opening to the board. It's not necessarily evidence per se, and he has witnesses that will come after and support his opening statement.
Absolutely. So this presentation is going to include a lot of photographs of the property, for example, and I can't testify to the authenticity of the photos and as to what they represent, but when I call my first witness, I'm going to ask that he certify as to the authenticity of the photos, and hopefully can give maybe a timeline perspective on them. Where I know the answer, I'll provide it, but I'll ask our first witness to verify that. So.
Working, you can grab a seat down here. Feel free to move around. Yep.
So this entire presentation has, which I promise it won't take as long as this, but it has 43 pages because a lot of it consists of pictures. I'm on the first page right now. So I wanted to provide the board some legal framework of a Section 68 application. So in New Jersey, pre-existing non-conforming uses refer to land uses or structures that were established lawfully before a change in zoning regulations that would render those uses or structures non-compliant with the new zoning requirements. These uses are considered grandfathered in and are allowed to continue even if they do not conform to the current zoning standards. So as the board can appreciate, property rights are perhaps the most fundamental concept of private ownership in the country, and they are protected in principle by the U.S. Constitution as well as various other legal frameworks. Section 68 of the MLUL attempts to honor this sacred right as it and its accompanying case law strive to recognize that property owners are invested in their land and that they have the right to continue using it in a way that was legally established before zoning changes occurred. So property owners are essentially required to rely upon established zoning laws in place before the current zoning came into being. When zoning changes take place, it can render previously lawful land uses non-conforming, which can lead to a loss of property value or the ability to use the property as originally intended. So there's an effort to protect pre-existing non-conforming uses to help prevent damage to an injury to private property owners. The idea is to prevent them from unjustly losing their investments due to changes in zoning regulations. So the board has an opportunity tonight to ensure that what we consider or perceive to be the pre-existing non-conforming uses in the M1C manufacturing zone can continue to contribute to the stability of what are and were well-established neighborhoods. Our contention is that the adoption of Ordinance 2230 was not to disrupt the character and fabric of an established zone such as the M1C zone. So this evening I'll ask the board that they consider the subject property site layout in addition to the testimony regarding the historic uses that existed on the property. Section 68 applications, in order to be eligible for them, Somerville Lumber must demonstrate that the non-conforming use has been in continuous operation since before the zoning change, that the use lawfully existed. Substantial continuation means that the use has been ongoing and hasn't been abandoned or discontinued for an extended period of time. I point that out because I want the board to be aware that just because a tenant vacancy occurs on a property does not mean that a certain use has been abandoned or discontinued. And I don't believe any such argument was raised previously, but I just figured I would address that on the first slide here. So as the board's well aware, the M1C zone is an industrial and manufacturing zone, And as will be discussed in greater detail, the zone, to my knowledge, really only consists of 5 lots, with Somerville Lumber's 3 lots, and then adjacent to Somerville Lumber, you have another industrial property, Lot 5. And the planning board actually just recently approved the 73,000 square foot new warehouse building on adjacent Lot 5. So the reason why I say that is because Section 68 was designed to ensure community stability. There were also a number of comments made by local officials that the intent of 2230, Ordinance 2230, which prohibited warehousing in the township, was not to interfere with those established warehouse industrial uses that already existed in the township. Rather, it was really adopted to address an influx of new proposed warehousing and industrial uses. So I wish to express a perspective that goes beyond the immediate matter of this appeal, that I think we have an opportunity to proactively address this concern now, or this concern that could arise in the future. I'd like to bring the board's attention to the concept of a regulatory taking or inverse condemnation, which pertains to instances where government regulations inadvertently lead to the devaluation or excessive restriction of private property without just compensation. I'd be happy to speak about this further tonight, but I think it's just important that I bring that up and highlight Somerville Lumber's concerns about the property's marketability or leasability as a principal retail use, and say that these are genuine concerns. So while I recognize that this aspect certainly falls beyond the scope of the zoning board's responsibilities this evening, I think it's worth considering how a certificate of nonconformity regarding principal warehousing use can play a pivotal role in mitigating these concerns. I think this is just a gentle reminder of the interconnectedness of the board's decision this evening for things moving forward. So turning to the second page here, we're really here this evening because we're trying to draw a distinction and understand the difference between a principal use and an accessory use. Nobody denies that retail has existed on the subject property. And similarly, I don't think anyone would deny the fact that industrial uses, such as warehousing, has existed on the property. The zoning officer's denial letter does not suggest that these uses do not exist on the property. Rather, the letter's central focus is on the nature of these uses, specifically whether the retail use on the property is principal or primary on the property, or whether, inversely, the industrial use is primary, principal on the property. So we're asking the board to rectify what amounts to just an improper characterization of the operations on the subject property by the zoning officer with respect to what constitutes principal and accessory uses. In the land use context, the distinction between those two uses revolves around the significance, purpose, and relationship of those various activities or functions carried out on a property. So now I'm turning to the third page. And on the page, as I previously mentioned, these are photographs of the operations on the property. And as I had previously stated, we'll have one of our witnesses authenticate the photographs. Principal uses are the primary, main, or predominant activities for which a property is developed or utilized. They're the core functions that define the primary purpose of the property's existence. Zoning regulations often dictate the permissible principal uses for different zones or districts. So for example, in a residential zone, a principal use and structure is most commonly residential dwellings. Commercial zone, same thing, you would have a principal use and permitted structure as commercial offices. And then typically in industrial manufacturing zones, you have a permitted manufacturing or warehouse industrial use and structure. Accessory uses are secondary or subordinate activities that support or complement the principal use of a property. They are typically incidental and subordinate to the principal use. They're always directly related to it. Zoning regulations often limit the scale and scope of the accessory use to prevent them from overshadowing the principal use. So in the industrial warehouse context, what would be some examples of accessory uses? You'd have office space, shipping and receiving space. You might have manufacturing space. This is particularly pertinent to this application. You have outdoor storage space. You may have research and development lab space. You find this in office buildings, but you might find it in a warehouse. You could have employee-only fitness centers, or I think on this property, for example, at some point, there was on-site, what I'll call a cafeteria that provided meals for purchase for employees on the property. And also, in this context, you can have showroom space, you can have retail space within the warehouse or an industrial structure. And this could be used to display products that can be sold to customers and clients directly. On this slide here, you see photos of what was the deck center, and this consisted of approximately 3,000 square feet of showroom space. Turning to slide 5, I might add here also that the deck center, for example, has another location in Flemington. So this location's a bit unique because you had, well, I'll get into the percentages, but you had a lot of warehouse and industrial space at this property versus the other property. You only have retail and showroom space. So this property was serving the retail and accessory space in Flemington, for example. One of the questions that people might have, can there be multiple principal uses on a property? I think that's a really good question because in some cases a property can have more than one principal or primary use. And typically, I looked at Bridgewater zoning regulations. I didn't see a provision that specifically restricted each lot to one principal use like I've seen in other municipalities. But typically, zoning regulations will lay out whether or not more than one principal use is permitted on a particular lot. For example, a lot of zones, not necessarily Bridgewater, but a lot of zones might allow for mixed-use developments where both commercial and residential activities are considered principal uses. And usually the regulations will determine the design, scale, and proportion of those uses on the property. So in the context of this appeal, it's very possible that the property in question has and had more than one principal use, namely retail, which is not permitted in the M1C zone, and to my knowledge was never permitted in the zone, and warehousing and industrial uses, which before 2022 were principally permitted uses in the zone. So I'm now turning to slide 6, and I would like to just go over the types of factors that boards tend to rely on in order to determine an accessory use versus a principal use. So boards are going to should consider the degree of integration. How closely is the accessory use connected to the principal use in terms of function and purpose, and vice versa, how closely is the principal use connected to the accessory use in terms of function and purpose? We're going to look to see whether they're integrated. Also, the physical space. So the portion of the property that's allocated to the principal and accessory uses and its significance in relation to the entire property. So as I move on in our presentation, as our witnesses will testify to, we kind of broke this down in percentages. So what space is allocated for what use. Next factor to consider is economic dependency. So what's really driving the economic nature of the property? Is it the accessory use or is it the principal use? We want to consider whether the accessory use is economically dependent on the principal use, and sometimes vice versa, the principal use can be somewhat dependent on the accessory use, but you try to balance the economic dependency of those two uses. Next, you consider the impact of the use to the neighborhood. So you should look at, for example, traffic impact. Are there a lot of cars coming to a property because it's generating a lot of retail customers, or is there a lot of traffic coming to the property because you have a high volume of trucks that are shipping materials? What constitutes the greatest impact to the community of the two uses? And lastly, you would look to, if there is an ordinance in place, you would look to the intent and purpose of the zoning regulations, the explicit language of the zoning regulations in place to determine what likely are the accessory uses and what likely are the principal uses. I just turned to 7, and these are some more photographs of some of the uses that occurred on Somerville Lumber's property prior to the change in ordinance. And again, I'll have Mr. Pettit talk about these pictures. So I wanted to give a overview on page 8. I just turned to page page 8 of the subject property map. This is an aerial taken from Google Earth. It's taken within the last 3 years and superimposed over it as kind of, they're labels that outline where specific uses, buildings are located. So if you're looking at the property and you can see my cursor, the retail component, which is located on predominantly lots 3 and 4 here. Somerville Lumber's property consists of lots 2, 3, and 4 right here. Here's lot 5, and this is lot 1 that I think is owned by the DOT. So the retail portion of the property is right here where my cursor is. Also, it's probably hard to tell from this aerial, but I think probably most people are familiar with this, that there are actually there are train tracks located here in this right-of-way that actually run directly to lot 4. I say that because, as the board can appreciate, retail uses typically do not involve trains that ship materials directly to the property in the same way that an industrial warehouse operation would have trains deliver goods to the property. And that train, to my knowledge, has not been in use since 2018. But I think, again, it serves to highlight the historic use for the property. Industrial and warehouse operations often deal with raw materials, bulk goods, or products that require storage and distribution, and that's why you typically see trains, for example, delivering those products to the site, where a retail establishment that solely relies upon its storefront, you wouldn't see that. Now I'm turning to slides 10 through 21. And here's slide 9. This is just a tax map, but let me turn to slides 10. And these 10 through 21 are just pictures of the property. And what I wanted to say is that we're not hiding the ball here. So if I go through this, so I'm on 10, I'm going to turn to 11, 12. What you're going to see in these photos are clear industrial and warehousing, but you're also going to see retail. So I didn't want to create a presentation this evening that tries to downplay or hide the fact that there was retail on the property. You're going to see the retail and showrooms, but the point of the presentation is to show that the retail or showroom component pales in comparisons to the gravity of the industrial and warehouse uses that existed on the site. I think I'm on 14. So you'll see here, for example, you have your retail area, and then you also have your office area. You know, there's no contention that this is a principal office use. The photos don't do a great job demonstrating the difference in size and scope of like the retail area here versus the warehouse area, but I have another exhibit that can be used to demonstrate that. Just move to the next page, showing some of the photographs from lot 4. So what does Somerville Lumber argue are its principal uses? Well, Somerville Lumber argues that the property primarily served as a warehouse and industrial use. At its core, Somerville Lumber contends that its property served as a facility for the storage, distribution, and handling of lumber and related construction materials. The primary function of the warehouse use was to store goods for later use or distribution, and that's exactly what Somerville Lumber did with its lumber products and building materials. So, looking at Somerville Lumber's historic track record, Somerville Lumber believes that they were crucial for the supply of construction materials to builders, contractors, and homeowners. And we would argue that the company served as a critical component for years and years and years to supply chain and logistics in New Jersey construction. And that the operations on this site, particularly the warehouse operations, were in similar scale and scope and consistent with those of other principal warehouse facilities throughout the township and state. I'm just turning to the next page here. Again, highlighting the balance between the warehouse uses and the retail uses. Somerville Lumber contends that the allocation of space dedicated for warehouse uses versus space dedicated for retail uses, again, aligns with the fundamental characteristics of a principal warehouse use. And as Mr. Kyle will testify to later this evening, when one examines the zoning regulations prior to the 2022 amendment, the core components of Somerville Lumber's operations, or at least this is Somerville Lumber's contention, such as storage, distribution, handling, warehousing, seems to closely mirror the ordinance that was in existence prior to 2022. Somerville Lumber's accessory uses. So Somerville Lumber notes that there are a number of accessory uses on the property. For example, the property was used to store goods, materials, machinery, trucks, and equipment outside of the warehouse structure, so outdoor storage. And this was actually already fleshed out to a certain degree by the township's previous zoning officer, that the previous zoning officer acknowledged in an email correspondence that this use was, in fact, a pre-existing non-conforming use. Accessory manufacturing, for example. Somerville Lumber wants the board to know that a portion of the property, a substantial portion of the property, was used for manufacturing, and Mr. Pettit can speak to this directly in his testimony, but manufacturing uses are the types of uses that are either customarily accessory to warehousing, or vice versa. They're customarily accessory. Warehousing is customarily accessory to manufacturing. While manufacturing in 2022 beyond remains a permitted principal use in the zone, Somerville Lumber concedes that the scale of manufacturing on the property was subordinate to the overall principal use, that being warehousing. So as the board can appreciate, warehouses are traditionally used for and house manufacturing uses, whereas retail showrooms and retail uses are not customarily associated with manufacturing uses. They don't normally house manufacturing. Accessory wholesaling. Somerville Lumber and its related entities routinely stored, sold, and distributed goods in bulk quantities to retailers and other businesses or individuals who intended to then resell those goods. And lastly, of course, there's accessory showroom and retail space in the property. Somerville Lumber concedes that it did have a small retail store and showroom within the warehouse to sell products directly to consumers, and that its related entities similarly had showrooms and retail space within its warehouse to sell products directly to consumers, but that's not really what drove the character and nature of this property, is what Somerville Lumber is arguing. So I'm going to go back now to the 6th slide. So we're supposed to consider, again, I spoke about the degree of integration, how closely the accessory use is connected to the principal use in terms of function and purpose, and vice versa. So Somerville Lumber argues that the retail showroom component to the property was very closely connected to the principal industrial warehousing use, and vice versa. The showroom was used by Somerville Lumber for years to sell its warehouse materials to consumers, and that's not refuted. So, thus, there's no question as to the degree of integration between the two uses. They're clearly integrated with one another, and I don't think the denial letter in any way suggests that retail is not highly integrated with warehouse use or vice versa, meaning that warehouse use is integrated with retail use. Physical space. The portion of the property allocated to the principal and accessory uses and its significance in relation to the entire property. Well, now I'm going to turn to page 22. And this is speaking to the east building on lot 4. And for purposes of the presentation, I'm going to refer to this as one structure. You can see here, I wanted to put in ratio. I wanted to come up with ratio of uses. So you can see, for example, that it lays out the percentage of space dedicated to office use, the percentage of space dedicated to retail use, the percentage of space dedicated to warehouse use. And this is supposed to demonstrate the maximum capabilities of each. So if it has 21% retail on the property, I'm not sure if, for example, Mr. Pettit would say, well, there was always 21% actually utilized, but the building is set up in a way to accommodate up to 21% of retail. Now I'm going to turn to the next slide, which is, I think, 23. That's going to show you a building layout. So you saw a bunch of photos, but the photos didn't do a fantastic job of encapsulating the difference in size and magnitude of the uses. So I thought that a building layout would serve its purpose in the sense that you can see the retail size in comparison to the warehouse size for this building. I'm just going to go to the next building here. So this is the West Building, or on Ms. Doola's report, identified as Building 2, although I'm including everything there. Again, you'll see very similar ratio of uses where the warehouse use is making up just under 75%, the retail use is making up 23%, and the office use is making 3%. And keep in mind, that's only looking at the percentage of use within the structures themselves. That's not taking into account the percentage of use of the entire property. The entire property is over 9 acres. So as I had mentioned previously, a lot of the property was used for outdoor storage to complement the industrial nature of the property. And then,
Silver, can I interrupt?
Sure.
For a second? That,
Mhm.
Vlad, can you go back to the last slide?
yes,
This is building which?
this is Building 2 on lot.
Building 2, got it. Now, is that the building that used to be at one point in time a rental center? Do I remember that correctly?
I would ask that question. I have witnesses that'll be able to better testify to which tenants over which periods of time occupied the spaces. Okay. So this is again a building layout for Building 2, which I had spoken about. The last structure on the property is the West Rear Warehouse Building, which is located behind Building 2. And the buildings are located on lots 2 and 3. So if you look just directly behind Building 2, you'll see another structure there. And that's 100% warehouse space. It was constructed sometime during the 2000s. So I'm going back to, actually, let me just give an overview here of the ratio of uses. Here's a building layout of that West Rear warehouse I was speaking about, and then here's the overall uses on the property relative to the structures. So you see over 100,000 square feet of warehouse space, 4,000 square feet of office space, and then 27,000 square feet of retail and showroom space, which, Mr. Sweeney, to your point, I'm not denying that there was retail on the property. I'm just asking to consider it based upon the ratio of the uses of the property. Going to another factor that the board should take into consideration on back to page 6 is economic dependency. So whether the accessory use is economically dependent on the principal use and vice versa, as will be testified to in greater detail this evening, the retail showroom space was important to Somerville Lumber's overall business model for many years. And there's no doubt that Somerville Lumber, for many years, tried to expand this component of their operation. But with that being said, Somerville Lumber argues that this was absolutely and unequivocally a very small fraction of Somerville Lumber's core business model. Somerville Lumber argues that while retail and showroom was dependent on the property's principal warehousing use, conversely, the warehousing and storage component of Somerville Lumber's operation was not necessarily dependent on the accessory, showroom, and retail space. So what I mean by that is that these warehouses, this warehouse use could have functioned independently of the accessory, retail, and showroom space. So for example, the deck center that's located in Flemington, New Jersey, which didn't have any warehouse space, that operated independently of having no warehouse space, and the warehouse at this property would deliver goods to the deck center in Flemington. So that's what I'm trying to highlight, that the warehouse could have operated independent of the accessory retail and showroom. So while Somerville Lumber focused on growing the retail and related showroom sector of its business, Somerville Lumber's business was largely dependent upon the industrial nature of the operations of the property, specifically as it related to its business relationships with professional builders who needed to purchase materials in bulk and then store those materials on the property while they would construct their projects. So really, Somerville Lumber was only able to operate on this property due to the size and scope of its on-site warehousing operation. The retail component, as I previously mentioned, could have been located anywhere. But the real reason why this property was important was because of the warehousing and outdoor storage space. Again, so Somerville Lumber's business was focused on the professional builder and the professional contractor who would buy and store significant materials in bulk to construct projects around the state. And while Somerville Lumber did attempt to target, and in many ways were successful, targeting the do-it-yourself home builder, that type of customer, that was a very, very small fraction of its business. As this board can appreciate, this type of do-it-yourself home builder that may have patronized Somerville Lumber's business back in 1975 or 1980 decreased over the years, as it was much more likely they would go to a Home Depot or Lowe's. So again, I think that as time went by, the retail component, although they made a lot of attempts to strengthen it, and the showroom component was further diminished based upon Home Depot and Lowe's coming into the area. Let's consider the potential impact of the use on the neighborhood, traffic, community character. So right now I'm turning to the subject property map on page 8. And Somerville Lumber argues that the M1C zone and ordinance was specifically crafted around Somerville Lumber and the neighboring lots' uses, predating 2022, of course. And again, this zone, to my knowledge, only consists of these 5 lots, 3 of which are owned by Somerville Lumber, 1 of which is owned by Mr. Denholtz, and lot 1, which is on the far left of my screen here by my cursor, which I believe is owned by the DOT. So, as the board can appreciate, warehousing and manufacturing were both principally permitted uses in the M1C zone prior to 2022. However, the permitted accessory uses or other uses were other uses that were, and structures that were customarily incidental to principal permitted uses. So the ordinance, for example, didn't say that retail was a permitted accessory use. It did, for example, suggest that if it was being used as an incidental use to the principal use, then it would be able to be there legally. In terms of site layout, Somerville Lumber contends that the parking on the property is nowhere near the amount required in order to serve a principal or primary retail operation. Simply put, as far as community impact is concerned, Somerville Lumber argues that the property is physically unable to function as a principal retail operation. The types of traffic that would predominantly come to the site, for example, as will be testified to in greater detail, were there cars coming there for retail purposes? Yes. But the predominant bulk of traffic going to and from the site would have been trucks delivering materials in bulk.
Question?
Sure.
You just say that there wasn't enough space for parking for retail?
I did say that, yes, that's correct. There is not enough parking on this property to allow the property to serve as a primary retail use.
Has the property changed in terms of what is considered a parking lot now in the last 2 or 3 years?
To my knowledge, it has not changed in the last 2 or 3 years for parking, but I would have to defer to the appellant to answer
I'm not
that.
a real parking expert or the space expert, but about 2 months ago, I drove by, and there was a pop-up car show there with over 200 cars. That, to me, means that there could be a lot of space for retail parking.
Can't speak to that. I don't have any knowledge of a car show, but I would say that the way the site is currently configured, you might be able to have cars parked in certain areas, but that's not how the site is currently configured. So the appellant's not in here seeking site plan review. They're not looking to change the parking on site so that it can accommodate retail. They're in with the existing site plan layout as it currently exists and saying what we're allowed to have right now would not function as a principal retail use.
Mr. Chairman, could I get our attorney to weigh in? We've listened, what I consider to be testimony. Comments are being made without support. Predominant traffic will not support retail. The small area that we have, the retail in Flemington, and it talks about it could function, but it didn't. It took the warehousing from Bridgewater that furnished Flemington. There are so many comments that are factually based that it's not the applicant contends that it's statements that are being made as fact that I don't believe that an attorney is able to testify to, and it's I mean, I respect him, and maybe it's all correct, but it's from the wrong mouth.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Silber is not offering testimony, right? And
Sure sounds
I
like he is.
cleared that initially. This is his opening statement. Nothing that he has said is testimony. He needs to bring up his witnesses to verify what he's said. He's trying to put his package together so you hear what they're trying to support with the next 4 witnesses.
We're going to do witnesses tonight, right?
We are going to do witnesses. I'm going to finish up as fast as I can here. And my goal was to lay out the arguments that Somerville Lumber is making. And my hope is that when you've heard the arguments, that the testimony will then be presented to support the arguments that are being made.
Is that okay with you?
There are many points of fact that I hope we don't lose in the testimony that's forthcoming.
Okay.
Thank you, Scarlett.
We'll put the parking comment on hold for somebody to come up, one of our witnesses, to address that. Nonetheless, that was and is Somerville Lumber's contention that there isn't adequate parking on the property to serve a retail use. So I want to go to slides 29 and 30, which are basically the last slides to my presentation here. And what you're seeing here are the zoning regulations in place prior to October 2022. And you'll see the M1C zone consists of these. It doesn't have lot 1 listed here, but it consists of the 4 lots that I'm speaking about. The Denholz property that was just approved for a 73,000 square foot new warehouse, and lots 2, 3, and 4, which is the property that is subject to this appeal. So let's look at the ordinance that was in place prior to October 2022.
If we could just go back and talk about
Sure.
the planning board approved. Warehouse on that property was an approved use, and that's why it was in front of the planning board and not the zoning board. Maybe you can clarify that to the
I
board?
absolutely can. So the application for a warehouse use on Lot 5 came in before the change in the ordinance. So while the hearing on the matter was after the adoption of the ordinance that prohibited warehouse use on the property, the applicant in that case was protected by what is known as the time of application rule, which means that if you submit your application and then there's an ordinance change, as you heard with the Centerpoint application, for example, the zoning that is supposed to be in effect is the zoning in place at the time of the application. So on Lot 5, for example, the zoning in place at that time was warehousing. It's no longer, but it is now what you would refer to as a pre-existing non-conforming use.
I have a question on this particular picture that you're showing. It says prior to October 2022, that's when the M1C zone was created, right? Now, I have a question for you.
Let me just,
Any tenants on the property, are they still there before they were there before 2022?
So I'll answer that question. First off, this is the zoning in place prior to the ordinance which amended. I don't have the exact ordinance written down, but this was the zoning regulations in place prior to 2022. So the M1C zone wasn't created in 2022. It was just amended. The permitted uses were amended in the M1C zone. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. In terms of tenants on the property that predated the change in ordinance, Somerville Lumber Company closed its doors in 2020. SRS Distribution, which we'll have testimony on this evening, but Somerville Lumber contends is virtually the same use as Somerville Lumber, existed in Building 2. There's a use on the property, a tenant on the property, ironically, Paoni's Paint to Chips, which occupies what was formerly the Deck Center, so a retail. They occupy what was formerly used as retail space, but they don't have any retail. They only have warehousing and storage in that space. And then the rear portion of the property is leased to UPS. So those, to my knowledge, are the tenants that existed prior to the adoption of Ordinance 22-30, which changed the M1C zone. So the Building 1, a lot of Building 1 was vacant because Somerville Lumber closed its business in 2020. Of course, being actively marketed to be leased to an industrial user. But yeah, if that answers your question. So just wanted to show the board what existed in the M1C zone prior to October 2022. So I'm going to turn to page 30. And you'll see I have highlighted the principal permitted uses in the M1C zone. I have highlighted here, number 2, manufacturing. Number 4, warehouses. Now we're going to turn to the permitted accessory uses, going to B1. Other uses and structures customarily incidental to a principal permitted use. You'll notice there in 1A, you don't see retail there at all. What you see, again, is warehousing. However, your permitted accessory uses, which are incidental to that principally permitted use, you'll see in B4, for example, retail is limited as an accessory to the permitted use, but it must be internal to the permitted use and primarily intended to service the needs of the employees. And then you'll see in B1, accessory retail services within professional business and research offices. So I think Mr. Kyle will testify to this, but it's the board should consider whether when they drafted this ordinance years ago, and I think this was previously the M1A zone, whether the township would intentionally draft an ordinance for 5 lots where almost all of the lots would be 3 of 5 of the lots would be non-conforming with the ordinance.
This is 22-30 ordinance you're talking about, right?
This is the ordinance that was in place prior to 22-30. So
Referring to the ordinance that changed.
no, I'm actually referring to the ordinance in place that predated 22-30. And what I'm asking the board to consider is whether for all these years in Bridgewater, whether it would make sense that the township would have zoning regulations in place for the M1C zone for a use that's non-compliant with those regulations. But I will defer to Mr. Kyle to give his perspective on that. So that's pretty much my background. I understand that we need some factual witnesses. So if I can, Mr. Chairman, thank you for indulging me. I do have some pictures that show the historic aerials of the property, which might be helpful to board members at some point. So they're there at the end of my presentation. They're from pages 31 to 42. But I don't know if you want me to go through these, if this would be a benefit to the board to see how the property changed over the years.
I think you can do that with your planner, maybe.
That's fine. So I'll call my first witness. Thank you very much for indulging me on this long introduction. But if I could call.
Let's just make sure that all the points that you hit, we have factual backups. I think Scarlett is a very good point that, you raise a lot of points. Whether or not we can weigh them, it has to be supported by evidence from your
Agreed.
Thanks.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could have, you're gonna just, they're gonna swear you in, in 1 second when they're ready. Mr. Oler, would you mind swearing in Mr. Pettit?
Raise your right hand, please, sir. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give to this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
And your full name, please?
Paul J. Pettit,
And would you spell your last name, please?
P-E-T-T-I-T.
Thank you, Mr. Pettit. You can put your hand down. Please consider yourself to be under oath.
So, Mr. Pettit, I would just ask that you just speak into this so that we can all hear.
Make sure you speak into the microphone so we can hear you.
Thank you.
Because my voice isn't that loud.
As close as you can to the
Yep,
mic,
as
gentlemen.
close as you can, okay. All right. So, Mr. Pettit, you've had quite a long-lasting relationship with this property in question, is that correct?
That is correct. I started there July 11th, 1974. And when they closed, well, I worked until January the 12th, 2020.
Great, thank you. So you were there for over 45 years, it sounds like.
Correct.
And can you tell us a little about your job or your formal job title at the property?
When I started there in 74, I was working in the service department, you know, taking care of the customers when they came in. And that lasted 3 years, and then I went on to receiving, to the receiving department. And I worked, that was primarily my job for 25 years, as I received all the products coming in, and I became foreman. And then from there, I went to the shipping department till the end, pretty much.
Okay. And obviously, you listened to my presentation. How would you describe the primary use for the Somerville lumber site? In other words, what operations during your employment there did you observe over 45 years?
Well, most of it was all storage because the material would come in and you would have to keep it there until the customer is ready to take it. You know, like all the windows and doors and stuff like that. And jobs get delayed and it could be sitting there for months, some of it even a year or so. And then naturally the lumber just keeps turning over. That was the outside storage.
So how would you say orders were normally placed for materials, for example? How were they purchased?
Oh, well, salesmen would order the stuff, and it would come in by trucks, and you would have to unload it. And then, you know, until the customer called and said he wanted the material, it would sit there.
So would you say builders would typically call and place orders, and is that typically how it would work?
Yes, builder would call and order the stuff. And like say you got a house of windows in, which could be 30 windows, 40. You have to put them somewhere, so you're storing them in the warehouse in the back until they're ready. And a lot of times they wanted you to get it there months in advance, so when they were ready to put them in, they would be on site so they can get them immediately.
Okay. And then there was a retail component to Somerville Lumber's operation, for example. So what percentage would you say would be, I would refer to it as daily on-site purchases versus what percentage of purchases would be where materials would be stored on the site for X number of days or months at a time? How would you differentiate between those two types of purchases?
Well, you always had the customer that would come in right away, but I would think I was more 90% of the big builder and you were holding material for them. And maybe 10% of the people walking in.
So I represented to the board that there were 3 main structures on the property. Would you say that's accurate?
Correct. You had the old deck center and you had the main warehouse with the showroom and the store, which was very small compared to everything else. And then off of the office, you had the big warehouse with the storage. And then you had the building across the way, which we called the mill building, where the millwork went, and that's where we started with our receiving. And then I guess in 2004, put another building up, and that's where the main receiving went after that.
Okay.
But then it wasn't big enough, so you had to take the stuff out and store it in the other building in the back. So there was a lot of forklift use with all that stuff.
And you keep referencing storage, so let's talk about that a little bit. So was there outdoor storage on the property?
Yeah, the outdoor storage is where we kept all the trucks and the lumber, naturally. And the decking. There was a lot of decking that we stored out there, and massive amounts of lumber. And the beams were there, which I guess you could call lumber. I mean, some of those beams are 48 feet long, so you need a large area for them.
And you mentioned trucks, equipment. So let's talk about some of the trucks that were on the property. First of all, you had stated there were trucks on the property. What were they used for?
Well, you had 3 trucks that had forklifts on the back, called Moffats, so they could unload the load when they got there. And those trucks were 24 foot long. There was 3 of those, and then you had 2 trucks the same size that would, if you wanted to dump loads, at the back of the truck raised up to dump it off. You had 2 of those, and then you had like 4 smaller flatbeds, just single axle ones, which they were all CDL drivers that had operate them. And then you had 4 box trucks that handled the windows and all the doors. And then you had a boom truck. Now, if you were in a tight spot, you had or they wanted stuff raised up to the 2nd floor, we would have a boom truck for that, 1 boom truck. And then we had a couple pickup trucks and a rack truck.
So with all those trucks there, would you say that any of those trucks would ever be used for delivering materials to construction projects?
Oh, all the trucks were delivering material for construction projects.
So routinely Somerville Lumber's own trucks would routinely leave the site and deliver materials to different construction projects?
Yes, every day.
Okay.
You could have between 10 and 20 loads going out every day.
Okay. And then let's talk about receiving. So Somerville Lumber also received huge shipments of materials on a daily basis, correct?
Correct. Sometimes you could get 10 tractor trailers in there, and you could have decking, could have lumber on it, could have plywood, could have anything. And then the tractor trailers would come in with the doors and the windows, or 24-foot box trucks would come in with the windows, and that was my primary job, unloading them.
So it sounds like you'd have trucks not owned by Somerville Lumber. You had estimated at least 10 tractor trailers a day. I mentioned in my presentation about the train.
Oh, yeah, and there was times when you would have come in the morning, and there'd be 3 trains sitting out there full of lumber, and you had a day to unload them. And that could happen. Some weeks you could get, like, say, 6 trains a week, and then you could get maybe 1 train a week, and there'd be weeks you didn't get any trains.
So it fluctuated.
Right, but it was a lot of lumber coming on a train.
Right.
You know, maybe, trying to think how many, 30, 40 units could be on one.
And did I accurately describe it when I said it went right to the property, right to the site?
Oh, yeah, Kim. They were parked outside because we didn't want them having keys to the gate, and then we would pull them in with the trucks. We would pull the one train at a time into the middle of the yard and unload it. And the big problem is when there was 3 of them, because you had to unload the one and then push it up to the other end, and then you had to get one out of there, so.
Okay. And then, and at what point did the train operation cease? Because it's my understanding that it no longer exists.
Yeah, there was a problem with the rail, so the rail wouldn't come back in 2018, I believe it was.
Okay. All right.
So then the lumber just came in by the tractor trailers.
Okay. I showed a number of photos during my presentation, which I thought it'd be useful at this time to go back and see if you recognize them and if you could authenticate them to the board as accurate representations of what the property looks like. Let's see. Just give me one second. All right, so starting on page 5 right here, would you say these aerials accurately represent the property, and how would you estimate when that existed? It looks like the service road isn't there.
Which page are you on?
I'm on page 5.
Thanks.
I can't even hardly see that.
Okay, hold on, let me
There's a lot of glare.
see. Any better? There's probably clear pictures that'll be.
Yeah, boy, it's really hard to make out which buildings are which on that.
All right, let's go to a picture that's a little more clear. So I'm turning to page 7. Can you describe to the board what these pictures are displaying and whether this is in fact
Okay,
the property?
As a matter of fact,
Just into the microphone.
no,
Sorry.
the one looks like we're unloading a train because that's got ply score on it. And you have to put the 2 units of lumber so you can come out of the train and set them down. So that's actually a train right there that.
This picture right here, this top left corner?
No, the one in the middle with the forklift.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Oh, okay, I see.
Right? That's what I could see. It's like there's only a little piece of it. But that's the way we used to unload the trains with plywood and pre-cuts. Because you couldn't go to the ground, you had to set them on something. And the one on the left, that's just regular outside storage.
Okay.
Where we used to store the lumber.
But these are definitely pictures of Summerall Lumber's property?
Absolutely. That's the back of the yard right there, for sure.
And then,
Like I said, that's the train that came in. And as a matter of fact, I used to drive that lift too.
and
That
this,
exact forklift.
if there's a train there, these photos must predate 2018?
Yeah, though, I can't see the buildings because when I first started there was only the main building in the back, the one that comes off of the store. Because it wasn't until 1982 when the mill building, when BWI came in. That was in 1982, and then in 2004, the new building, we called it, that's when that went up.
Okay.
And that's all the buildings that were permitted on that amount of acreage. So with that forklift unloading that had to be back in the 80s.
Okay. Would you say, so if you're putting a time period on these photos back to the 80s, would you say absent the train picture, which is this picture here, the middle picture on the right,
Right.
would you say that this accurately represents what happened and what existed on the property up until Somerville Lumber's closing of business in 2020?
Oh, absolutely. That's what you did. You got stuff in and you shipped it out. It was just a rotating thing. Everything came and everything went.
And you don't have to talk to specifics here. I'm on page 8 right now, which is labeled subject property map. But would you say that this generally looks like the site as it looks today? That's obviously, there's a bunch of labels on there, but
Yes, that was the layout of it. That's the shape. But you couldn't even tell if you were on Route 22. A lot of customers used to come in and say, we didn't even know this stuff existed back here. So, until they went back there and saw everything. 'Cause we were pretty secluded.
meaning you say that because you're saying there was visibility to the front retail portion, but there was very limited visibility to the outdoor storage and warehousing.
Because he went from 22 all the way to 287.
Right.
And from 22, you couldn't see back there. The building blocked everything.
Okay, so now I'm on page 10, and I have these identified as photographs, Lot 4 East Building. And what I had said to the board, I believe that all of these photos were taken on, anything you see on the white page were taken between the years, between 2017 and 2021. Would you say that that accurately reflects what the property looks like today, or as a more modern, current representation of the property?
Wait, you gotta bring that a little closer.
Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. See. Okay. Now I'm zooming in on page 10.
Okay, so that's the, right, that's the mill, and then the new building's way in the back. That's the back of the yard. You see, I couldn't see that before.
We have, I should have done that a long time ago. We have the
How
problem
many years
fixed here.
ago was this picture taken?
These pictures were taken between 2017 and 2021. I don't know who took them, so I'm asking Mr. Pettit to verify that that sounds to be an approximate date and time at which these photos were taken.
Yes.
Do you know what we're looking at here?
Wait, what?
It's okay if you, there's a million photos to go through, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
Okay, let's go to the next. If you want to, can you see this better now, though, that it's blown up, or do you need to?
Yeah, but I'm just trying to think. I mean, we parked our cars way in the back, but I'm trying to think what building that is.
It's okay.
Or is that the...
It's okay. It's okay. We'll go on to the next slide here. It's okay. All right. So how about this here?
That's the front.
I'm on page 11, showing pictures of the east building.
Right, that's the front of the main store.
Okay. And what's depicted here? What tenant is here?
That's over where the showroom is.
So which tenant occupied this space? Just because the board was asking questions about certain tenants. So I don't know if you can tell from this picture, but
Well,
do you know?
that's where Cornerstone was up in that part of the building,
Okay. So Cornerstone was there.
right? Cornerstone was, they were sort of like a builder. You know, they bid it on jobs and everything, but they were just through Somerville Lumber. No, that was not rental, not in, that's where the showroom is. That's in the main. No, that would be the old deck center,
Which is not this.
which is to the right of that.
Right, so we'll get there. So Cornerstone was a related entity to Somerville Lumber?
It was.
Okay.
That was Grand Rental.
Okay, so now I'm looking at the bottom image on page 11 here.
Right, now that's the back of the yard. Behind that wall is where, that was the shipping shack. That little red building where we shipped That's where we had
This
our
one here?
computers, yes.
Here, okay.
And that's where all the loaders would come in and get their orders in there. And behind that, on that older wall there, that's where we kept all the pre-cuts and plywood, which could be 50 units of pre-cuts and up to 100 units of plywood in that building behind that.
This building, it's blue.
That's the one that's all rusty.
Okay. All right. Now I'm gonna go to,
And you can see we had to park in the back because there wasn't enough parking out front. So all the yard employees had to park in the back. There's enough behind that other building, not that building.
this building here.
That,
Mr. Board Member Lespiza, are you talking about this
Yes.
building here?
oh, that's the building, that's actually where we first started to do our receiving out of. You can see there's a dock there. So that was just a building we used for storage. That is actually off of the main building. That building there, this is the far side of the main building.
Let's refer to it as Building 1, Building 2, and then that warehouse in the rear portion as Building 3. So
Okay, so this would be building 1, would be the main building.
the main building, which you identified as
As
this
this one.
structure. Okay.
That's the back of it, and that's what we call the leg.
Okay.
And it goes around to the left, and then you got all warehouse space in there, and then you go into the store. There's a back way in, and then the back offices are back there too. That's back in that section.
So this here is Building 2?
No, that's all part of this.
Oh, that's all part of there. Okay. That's
No,
the leg?
Building 2 is to the left. This is the leg right here.
Okay, this is
It
the
comes
leg.
down, it looks like a leg of that big building. See, you're only seeing the back of that building.
Okay, so if you reference Ms. Doyle's report,
In between, you see in that gap right there, there's a driveway that goes into the main building, which that picture does not show that.
okay. So if you look on page 2, Building 1,
That's all building 1, all that.
the portion furthest away is what Mr. Pettit is referring to as the leg, which appears to be the front of Building 1, located closest to the service road. Okay. And then what,
Right, that's close to the railroad because you could actually see the railroad right where those puddles are. That's where the railroad came in. See those puddles? There's a railroad right there.
it came in over here.
You could probably even see that one puddle. You could see part of the rail, actually.
Turning to page 12. Again, still on the east
Okay,
building.
there's where you can see, there's the entrance, and that's where the saw is in that little building. And see, that's where we kept our decking and that whole center part. Right, and that's the backside of that same building.
And just so we're on the same page
This is
here,
all building 1 still, this whole, everything you're showing me here. See, now I can see it.
so we're on page 12. I'm looking at the bottom photograph entitled North View, northwest side of warehouse. So you're saying that's all part of Building 1, right?
Yes. That's back where we had our molding standing up, and all the pine was in that second doorway.
Okay, now I'm going to page 12, and now we're going to look at some photographs of the east building, or what is still Building 1.
That's the showroom. That's on the far side of that building.
Okay. So what we're looking at here is the very, very front
Way up in
portion
here.
of Building 1?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so far that's all we saw was that one building. That's how big that building is.
And would you say the retail area, for example, the showroom area, how does it compare in size and intensity and scope to what you look at below here, which you'll see the warehouse,
Right,
for
that's
example?
the inside of that main building. I think the showroom knows maybe 10%. If that, I don't. But that's the warehouse.
So it's hard to assess the size of the uses based upon the photographs. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
So if you look at this, for example, this is the office
That's
space,
the back office, yes.
and this made up of a very small percentage of the space in the building one. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the inside of building 1, next to the store.
All right. So now we're moving to, we're still on lot 4, still in building 1. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the offices. Now, that's an old picture too, it looks like, but
This is page 14, and it's the top photographs here. So what do you see here?
that just looks like all the offices in the back.
And this, how about here? If you can't see it, it's okay to say you
Oh,
can't.
that's where the store was on the left, because that's just empty.
Okay. Now we're looking at what's identified as first floor retail area, second floor on page 14. What do you see there?
The second floor, that was the offices where the main guy that did all the orders for the salesman, he was up there.
And then the photograph to the left of it, where it's labeled retail area. What building is that in?
That's got all. Wait, it's
I'm gonna make it.
hard to tell from that picture. But that could even be the deck center. I see there's a deck there.
Okay. Well, but it's definitely retail though, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Silbert,
Mm-hmm.
can we just ask Mr. Pettit to, if he hasn't already, look at all the photographs and just verify for the board that they are true, accurate representations of the building?
So, Mr. Pettit, do you want me to go? Well, I don't know
I
if
want
you
him
could-
to see all the pictures.
That's
Tell
fine.
us that he saw them all and tell us that they
Yes,
are
these-
accurate representations.
Those are all. Those are definitely the lumberyard. That's the inside of the main building.
Okay. All right.
It's the outside.
But the photographs, I'm going to quickly go through them. We don't have to go through each photo. What Mr. Oler is saying, so that we can speed things along here, is that we authenticate all these photos as being authentic representations of the property. So if you're able to do
Yes,
that.
They are.
Okay. All right.
So, Mr. Pettit, you can testify that you've seen all the photographs that Mr. Silbert has
Yes,
presented?
they are all.
And they
part of-
accurately represent the condition of the property when you work there?
Yes, absolutely.
I had a couple of questions for you on just a couple things. Did you deal with retail customers also?
Only if they were picking up a special order. They would come to the building and we would give it to them.
Because you testified that you took orders, so did you only take orders from builder customers?
Well, the builders would talk to the salesman, and then there was people that would walk in. There was counter guys up in the store,
Right.
countermen.
I thought you testified that you also took some orders from builders, was that?
No, I didn't take order. I
Okay.
brought in special
What about when you first?
special orders. I brought in, the trucks delivering to us. I didn't take orders.
Oh, I got you, okay. So as things
I
were delivered
accepted special orders into the building.
into the building? Okay.
Yes,
So you
I
didn't
didn't
deal
take
with the retail side of the property?
No, I was strictly storage and receiving material.
Can you represent to us how many employees were involved with the retail side of the property and how many were involved with the warehouse side?
Well, the warehouse out in the back, we would have, say, 15 people working there. And inside, they would have 3 counter guys. And then up in the showroom, there was 3 other people, I believe.
Okay. And did most of the work generated at the facility come from the warehouse portion of the property or the retail?
No, most of the work came from the warehouse, absolutely. Because that's where everything came in and everything was stored.
Okay.
So, and that's where mostly everything was in the storage section.
When you say storage, you mean inside in the building? though,
Inside
the
and
warehouse?
outside, because you had to store the lumber outside, and the trucks outside, and inside we kept all the plywoods and the molding, and the windows and the doors.
So if weather wouldn't
sheetrock and
impact it, it
stuff.
could stay outside, but everything else was in the building?
Yeah, well, the decking was outside too. Anything that was okay to be out in the weather was outside.
Treated woods would be outside?
Treated wood was outside in the beginning until the sun destroyed it. So towards the end, we moved it into the lake because we had room, and that saved it because the sun is really bad on treated. But there was a time when it was stored outside, yes.
Okay. And was there ever a time where a retail customer could just walk through the warehouse section?
They would drive in with their cars. They didn't really walk through.
Okay.
You know, they didn't want people wandering around,
All right.
so they didn't get hit.
And can you, Mr. Silva, just show them the floor plan on that building where there was a retail section? Just wanted to be sure that you can represent to the board that that's an accurate representation of the floor plan when you work there?
Got it. Now I'm looking at building layout on the 23rd page of the east building located on Building 1.
Right, that's the main building.
Would you say that the layout that's shown on the screen is an accurate representation of what you believe to be the values of square footage designated for retail showroom space versus the square footage designated for warehouse space?
Absolutely, because where you see where that says retail showroom, that's a small area. The rest of all that is all warehouse.
All right,
Outside of that-
so if I came in to look at a deck or bathroom fixtures or something, I'm limited to that 15,000 square foot area?
To
That's what
that
I'm
front
saying.
area, yes.
Okay,
And then orders would be given out. If you were to pick something up, you would drive in there.
to go around and pick it up
You
elsewhere?
would go, right,
Pocket
and then there
money.
was a gate guy would stop you and direct you to where you had to go.
Okay, and what about the other buildings? Did they have any retail sections?
No, the other buildings were all for storage.
Well, how about the front of what's shown as Building 2
Well,
on
that-
page 2?
That was where the deck center was, over here, building 2.
Okay, so building 2 showing a deck center in that 12,000 square feet, and I'm sorry, go back to building 1. What was in that 16,000 square feet then? 15,660 square feet retail showroom. What was the showroom showing?
The showroom was just that little square right there.
Yeah, what was in it?
What tenants?
Oh, that was where Cornerstone was up in the showroom. That was more the cabinet division,
Okay,
was Cornerstone.
so, okay.
Doing kitchens, putting
More kitchen materials were in that building, and then the
kitchen
next
materials
building
were
was still
stored in the back building.
I'm sorry, say again?
The kitchen materials, I'm talking about cabinets and stuff, were all stored out in the back. There wasn't much storage up in there. That was just showing.
Okay, so I'm looking at what's, I think, Building 1, is that what we're on this?
Yes.
plan? Right. So Building 1 showing a retail showroom of 15,660 square feet. That's where Cornerstone was. They
Yes.
would do the building, they were the building arm, let's call it. Is that fair to say for some
Well,
of the
they would
lumber?
do more kitchens and stuff, and more custom.
Cornerstone didn't utilize all this warehouse space, is that correct?
No, that was all our space. That was not Cornerstone space.
Right.
Cornerstone only was up in that little showroom.
So what was the majority of the warehouse space in this building used for?
That was for storing pine, PVC, plywood, pre-cuts, and then the end treated. Sheetrock was there one time. I mean, it all varied over the years.
So would the client or the customer that would walk into the retail showroom be very different than the type of person that would store their materials in the warehouse section?
Yeah, the people storing in the warehouse were more the contractors and the builders.
So is it fair to label this as different businesses or different components to the overall Somerville lumber business?
They are different components, yes.
Okay.
So, and Mr. Pettit, what was Grand Rental?
That was just a rental company that they had where they would, like, if you wanted come in and rent a machine, you know, like a Bobcat or tents and stuff like that.
Okay, did that have a designated area in one of the buildings also then?
That actually started out where the deck center was.
So is that
That was in building 2.
building 2? So what I have here on the 25th page is a layout of building 2. Would you agree that that accurately reflects the building layout of building 2, as shown on the screen here?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you store things for grand rental? So a customer would come in, I want to rent a party tent. Would they go drive their car to the warehouse and pick up the party tent?
No, they had like trailers. They were like hanging over the hill. They were like 40-foot trailers.
Let me ask the
They
question
stored-
again. Did the warehouse space support grand rental's retail operation?
They had their own space in those trailers in the back of the,
Did the warehouse space that you referenced support grand rental's retail operation? It's just yes or no.
it did at one time, yes.
So a customer would come in, rent a party tent, and then go to your warehouse to pick it up?
Well, Grand Reynolds started in where the deck center, and then it moved to the mill building years later. And then they would go pick it up there because they had it stored in the warehouse, yes. All the material was stored there.
Sometimes. So in their first location, Grand Rentals stored items in the warehouse space. When they moved locations, they did not use the warehouse space to
No, they
store.
used the warehouse space all the time because they had to put their material somewhere. So their machines were all stored outside in the warehouse, yes. You know, outside of the warehouse, because they didn't need to be inside.
have
If we're looking at the, I'm sorry.
About the type of customers that you have is the mostly contractors. So they already know what they want to buy. So usually they would not even come to the office. They would go to the warehouse and pick up the stuff. Is that how it works? Or did you have customers who are like modifying their house or something like that?
No, they
what
would
was it?
come back in the warehouse and pick it up, or we would deliver it. Most of our business was delivering. You know, because we had our box trucks, so we would deliver most of the material. There wasn't a real lot of material picked up. A lot of it was delivered.
If I can just,
Yeah, actually, I was wondering if a lot of people come in and go out, or is it just a contractor coming to pick up stuff? That's the big question, traffic-wise.
I mean, there was people that came in, yes, but a lot of it was contractors ordering and us delivering it. So it was both.
going back to the comment on grand rental, you see 38,000 square feet of warehouse space, and you're saying that grand rental occupied either all or a portion of this retail showroom. Of this 38,000 square feet of warehouse space, and I'm looking at building 2, page 25, what percentage would you say was utilized by grand rental? Was all of it used by it? Was only a certain percentage used by grand rental?
Well, at one time, Grand Rental had that whole building, but the back part was all their storage.
Okay.
They only had a small showroom in the front where that square is.
Okay, so what you're saying is that they occupied this retail showroom here, they used the entire warehouse space at one point.
For storage.
Okay,
We've had a store, and then they had those 4 trailers in the back that they stored their stuff.
okay.
If a client calls and says, I want 10 windows, is that a retail sale? And if a client calls and say, I want 30 windows, is that a warehouse sale? And are all warehouse sales non-taxable because
In our warehouse, we stored the stuff till they were ready to come. So
a better definition in terms of, I know it sounds simple, but what's retail versus what's a wholesale sale? In other words, if I want 10 windows, is that a retail sale? And if I want 30 windows, is that considered a wholesale warehouse sale?
If you got it in, like on our Anderson van, we call them vans, you would order them that way for a special price. And that wouldn't come in under a wholesale, I would believe.
Well, I think we're trying to draw a distinction between when a professional builder purchases materials from Somerville Lumber versus a daily customer. Is that?
I'm trying to understand that what a warehouse is versus what retail is. Is retail only if I walk in and I can pick it off the shelf? Because you can't pick windows off the shelf. I'm trying to understand, does part of the warehouse really support a lot of retail?
Right, but a warehouse is just where we stored everything.
But this.
Can I interrupt 1 second? I think when we were looking at, I think that's building 2, at one point, you acknowledged that the retail showroom is where the rental business showed their stuff or did business with the customers that came in, and the warehouse behind that was where the rental business stored their materials. In other words, that warehouse existed in support of the rental business. Is that correct?
For maybe 2 years they were there. And then they were gone. And then they actually had another rental company that was in the back of the other warehouse. But they had to store their materials somewhere.
Right, so they stored their rental materials in the warehouse in support of the rental business, correct?
In support of, but if you're gonna have stuff that you wanna rent, you have to have a place to put it.
Right,
And you have to store it somewhere, so that would be stored
right.
in their warehouse.
Support of the rental business, correct?
Right, if it was rental stuff, yes.
Okay, thank you.
What time period did that, if you remember, what time period was Grand Rental located in that building? Approximately, you said about 2 years, you said?
Yeah, before the deck center, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly what,
How about decade? Was it 90s, 2000s, approximately?
so the deck center was there in the 2010s time period, I guess.
So
So it had to be in the late 90s, early 2000s,
Where was the deck center? Building 1 or Building 2?
building 2
And the material,
was stored in the back warehouse. They had.
okay,
they did
so
not
even prior to the rental business, when that was a deck center,
after.
before, after, whatever, when that was a deck center, the warehouse behind it had material that was stored in support of the deck center.
No, there was no material stored in that building for the deck center, just their showroom. We stored it all in the main building, outside actually.
You're saying it was stored on the adjacent property?
Right, of building 1 property. The deck center did not store any material in there.
Okay, so the deck center had no storage anywhere on site?
No, the only stuff in their showroom, they might add screws and, caps and stuff like that, but no decking material.
Okay.
There wasn't enough room to put that there.
Well, if I'm understanding correctly, and Ms. Predek, correct if I'm wrong, you're saying that storage for the Building 2, which was located on Lot 2 and 3, when it was deck center, was located on Lot 4 in Building 1.
But, yes, we unloaded everything for the deck center in the back. All the decking and would come off the tractor trailers was unloaded in the back at Somerville Lumber. And then we stored it there until it was ready to be shipped, and then we shipped it on the trucks with the Moffats.
Okay, so this material that you're just now describing for the deck center, it was stored somewhere on site, and then you would ship it to wherever it was
Right, it
required, correct?
Stored back in the warehouse in the back, yes.
So some of the warehouse space that was used to support the decking material was to support the decking business, correct?
But then that was the Somerville Lumber had their decking business, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, to on or Mr. Sweeney's inquiry one step further. For the cabinets and, you know, the kitchen stuff business in the other building, how much of that was stored on site? So between these two retail operations, what percentage of the space are we storing their equipment that's backing up those retail operations compared to the contractor orders?
Well, the contractor orders were stored in the warehouses. And that was a big amount of space. I mean,
What about the cabinets and all the stuff for
the
corner?
cabinets were back in that far warehouse stored upstairs.
So we have space for Cornerstone and we have space for
But the
rental company / the decking company, depending on the time frame.
cabinets weren't only bought, the cabinets were bought by contractors too. It wasn't only Cornerstone. So the Cornerstone didn't have 100% of all his cabinets there.
The decks, sorry, go ahead, I didn't mean to.
Maybe
interrupt
10%. Most of it was contractors and all buying the cabinets.
you. The deck center had an alternative location though, is that correct?
In Flemington, yes.
And did that location have a warehouse or any
No, we
storage?
stored all that stuff. They
you-
didn't have any storage there.
So you stored all of deck center's materials on the subject property?
Right.
So I'm going to ask you another question. So the retail showroom of the deck center, for example, knowing that there's another location in Flemington, do you think that the retail showroom component was necessary to be on this subject property, or could it have been located anywhere in New Jersey?
Could have been located anywhere. They would put their orders in and we would unload them and ship them.
So why is this property special? Why the deck center want to be in this property?
Because it was next to Somerville Lumber.
How about the warehouse space? Do you think that was a reason why somebody would want to be on this property? In other words, would you say that the exceptional street visibility or the site was conducive for a retailer, or would you say the site was conducive for a business that wanted to store materials on the property?
A business that wanted to store things because you can't even see it from the highway, so you wouldn't really want retail.
So like Deck Center, if not all, most of the tenants on the property could have had their retail showrooms elsewhere in the township, elsewhere in the state. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up on your line of questioning, if I may. Some of the earlier questions were trying to establish that whether it was the deck center or perhaps the showrooms for the cabinets, alternatively the bath fixtures, whatever the people would walk into and be exposed to this material, the warehouse space was used in support of those businesses. And for you to say that the showrooms could be anywhere would separate them in a way that just doesn't exist. So I'm trying to see what your point is, because I could have a business anywhere and contract with a warehouse to store it. But if I'm operating a business as Somerville Lumber, and I have, in addition to all of the things we talked about, showrooms for cabinets and decks and bathrooms and flooring and tile and all those kinds of things, I also have the warehouse to support those businesses that are in the front end. And admittedly, contractors may have gone into the showrooms just as retail walk-in off the street people went into the showrooms. But I'm trying to understand what your point is, that the warehouse would exist without the retail component, or the retail component could exist without the warehouse, but it's better together. I'm all confused. I don't think you've made a compelling case. And with all due respect to Mr. Pettit, I think some of the questions we're asking him, he's just not qualified to answer. He can validate the operations of shipping and receiving and working with the contractors as he had done and managing special orders. But when we start to get into the questions about retail and the percentage of sales, I don't think that's his level of expertise, and I think it's unfair to have him try to answer those questions.
Understood. And what my goal was with asking those questions towards the end was to demonstrate that there are retail uses throughout the country that cannot function without warehousing, right? And some retailers have warehousing on site and some retailers don't. So I don't mean for this to confuse you, but if I think of Amazon, for example, I go to the online website and I place an order, and Amazon owns their warehouses and they facilitate the shipment there. And there's not a brick and mortar location. Somerville Lumber goes all the way back to the late 1940s. So there is a brick and mortar location there. But what I was trying to convey to the board, that the predominant function of this property, which I hope that my witnesses after will attest to, is that orders would be purchased on the phone, similarly to going on Amazon.com and ordering your materials through Amazon. Somerville Lumber needed a site to store their materials for these professional builders, that for a year at a time, the materials would be purchased and stored there for a year while these major projects were developed. But it's almost like I'm trying to use the Amazon model in my example and comparing it to a time period that goes back, obviously predates the internet, that the real purpose of this property was so that builders could store their materials here, yes, purchase it from Somerville Lumber, but store it on the property while their projects were underway, under construction. I'm not trying to discount the fact that there was retail on the property.
At the same time, you have contractors who will purchase materials and need them delivered within short order. And by Somerville Lumber maintaining inventory, they're able to accommodate those sales. So not all sales were done a year in advance or 6 months in advance, where Somerville Lumber is storing it for them, but a combination of those things which led to this business.
And I would let Mr.
There
Pettit
was a
respond to
good
that.
percentage of stuff that did sit there a very long time waiting for contractors.
I understand. But that's not all you had.
No, that's not all we had, no.
All right. If we could take a break. Let's take 10 minutes. The time is 9 o'clock. Why don't we call it 9:10? Let's reconvene and continue on. Thank you.
Do you need Mr. Pettit, or can we move on to another witness, or do you have other questions for him? Sure. Paul? Thank you.
Booth? Yes, here. Mr. Wiley? Here. Mr. Lespiza? Here. Ms. Amin?
Yeah,
Mr. Sweeney?
Here.
Mr. Bongiorno?
Here.
Mr. Kulak?
Here. I don't believe I had any further questions. I just wanted to establish in the questioning that there were certain areas beyond Mr. Pettit's expertise and others that were within his area that he validated. For example, the pictures of the warehouse and his understanding of the business from his end on the shipping, receiving, and special orders part. Beyond that, I think we put him in an unfair position. So
I agree 100% with what you're saying.
thank you.
Well, I think I had one other question. So, Mr. Pettit, in your experience working there, were there areas in the warehouse that were used for warehousing that had nothing to do with any of the walk-up retail areas?
The warehouse was set up for anyone that bought stuff, and which was mostly contractors, because, you know, they needed a large amount of stuff so that they could do their job.
And they would order how?
The contractors would order through their salesmen. See, they would order all that because we had the material there.
Can I ask a question in a different way? So I understand what Mr. Oler's question is, so that the predominant manner, and you correct me if I'm wrong, the predominant manner in which the business was done was that orders were taken by salespeople, sent to you, you fulfilled the orders, but all the inventory was warehoused in your site by train or by truck. It was sitting there waiting, and then the orders came in, correct?
It would come in and we would take it off the trucks or the train and store it. Well, the lumber naturally would be for people coming for us to make our orders out of.
And it would be the rare occasion that a customer would even be able to come into the warehouse portion of the site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I just want some further clarification on that, because a retail customer might come into the retail space and be looking for items that would be fulfilled by the warehouse. It could be millwork, it could be some special cuts or something, and they were, and my understanding was, they were allowed into that space where they drove in to pick up materials. Is that a fair statement to make, Mr. Pettit?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Good. All right. Thank you. There's no more questions, members of the public. Oh, I'm sorry, Scarlett, by all means. I apologize.
If you feel comfortable answering these questions, please do. If not, let us know. There was some discussion about the Flemington deck store, and you seem to have some familiarity with that. I have a couple of questions. Were you familiar with the fact that the Flemington deck store sold things such as lawn equipment, chairs, tables, grills for the outside patio area? Were you familiar with that?
I was not familiar with that stuff. I didn't have anything really to do with that.
Okay.
I am not familiar with that.
You're not familiar with that? Okay, that's what I'm looking for. The next thing is, there was a deck store in the Somerville lumber site in Bridgewater. They had a deck area. How many years did that store exist as the deck store?
The deck store had to be, I don't know, 3 years, 4 years. I'm not exactly sure on the exact amount of time that it was there.
Okay. We have the Flemington deck store also. And I don't know if you ever went there, but I frequently went there. How long, that didn't seem to be operational very long. Can you estimate that, or are you unfamiliar with that?
I'm unfamiliar with Flemington. Everything I did was in Bridgewater.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Members of the public, any questions on Mr. Pettit's testimony? All right, seeing none.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate your time. We call him Paulie. Mr. Caruso, Dominic Caruso, please.
Mr. Caruso, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give to this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Would you state your full name for the record, please? Caruso? Thank you, Mr. Caruso.
Mr. Caruso, in addition to being a developer, you're also a resident of Bridgewater, is that correct?
Correct.
How long have you been a resident of Bridgewater?
My family moved to Bridgewater in about 1972.
All right. And you've been in the building business for about how long?
Since I can remember, basically, it's generational. My dad actually built his house, and he bought all the lumber from Somerville Lumber at that time, 1972.
And have you had any business dealings in the past with the Somerville lumber site?
Yes, lots of dealings.
And in fact, your father started there.
Yes, 1972.
Can you provide any details about your experiences with this property and essentially what its historical uses have been?
This property, since I can remember, has been located within the Bridgewater Industrial Park. And that area has been considered and known as an industrial area since I can remember. It's still considered to be an industrial park, even though they changed the name to a business park. My primary dealings in business with Somerville Lumber was that Somerville Lumber is basically a big supply house, a warehouse that supplies builders. And I've always known them to be primarily servicing builders and developers that are building tracts of homes.
So how did you, let's say you had, I don't know, 50 houses that you were building in the area. How would you order from Somerville Lumber?
Well, the first thing we would do is contact our salesman, and he would come to my office, and we would give him the different various plans of the types of houses that we wanted to build. And then we would also supply him with takeoffs of lumbers that we had our framers do. And then they would take the plans back to their shop, and they would have guys up on the second floor that would go through and do takeoffs on all the windows and the cabinets and the trim and the doors and things of that nature.
And as far as you know, those materials were already stored on the property, correct?
No,
On Somerville Lumber
yeah,
site.
some were there, I guess, as we needed them, but then we would put orders through for, say, 5 houses, and then they would have the materials delivered there, but we would take it as we needed onto our site because we had no room on the construction sites.
Do you have any sense of how long some lumber would be in that site? In other words, was lumber there, and then you could come and say, I want 100 pieces of 2x4, and it would be there, it would be stored, correct?
Once we placed the orders and we priced out that job, yes, as we needed the material, we would give them our anticipated start dates, and we would start processing orders.
But you knew those goods would be available for you?
Yes.
Okay. Based upon your dealings with the property, how do you describe its primary function?
Its primary function, from my perspective as a builder, was basically a warehouse, supply house type of facility.
And is it your opinion as a professional developer, builder, that warehousing was a primary and an integral component of the property historically at this site.
Yes, since I can remember and since I've done business with them over the decades, it's always been primarily a warehouse and a supply house for builders.
And did you personally witness activities like storage, distribution, loading, unloading of goods on the property?
I've personally seen those operations over the years. For the most part, when we required material to be shipped to our jobs, whether it was lumber, whether it was windows, or whether it was cabinets or trim or whatnot, we would put the order, call them up, call our salesman, I need you to release, house number 3 with all of the, the lumber or the windows or whatever.
And there's been some discussion about the showroom component of this. How would you describe your experience with the showroom?
I felt that the showroom was an ancillary use to the building supply warehouse, and that as we would design houses and pick out the types of materials we would need, they would have their showroom full of different types of trim, which we would decide which type of trim we would want to use, different windows that we would want to use, or different types of cabinets that we wanted to use, because we would give allowances to our buyers, and those buyers would have those allowances that were all the materials that were stored at the Somerville Lumber Building.
Based upon your decades of experience in dealing with Somerville lumber, would you say that, could you put an approximate percentage on what was retail and what was warehouse?
My guesstimation would be that 85 to 90% of the business was warehouse, and the retail, as I stated, was an ancillary type use.
Okay. As a professional builder, were you familiar with the property's reputation as a lumberyard and warehousing facility?
Absolutely, yes.
And was the property known for its role in the community as supplying construction materials and accommodating a warehouse function?
Yes, myself and other competitors and friends and other builders all around the pretty much Tri-County area, Somerville Lumber was considered to be a main supplier for builders and contractors.
Can you share instances, any instances or projects where you or your development company relied on the property for its warehousing services and materials?
In some cases, we were building houses. Sometimes they would go faster than, which is the way we wanted it, but sometimes if sales were not moving as quickly or if the houses would slow down, we would have materials that were purchased on a bulk order that would have to stay there for many months at a time.
So in that regard, you routinely sourced your construction materials from the property's warehousing operations, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Were you aware of the change in the zoning in 2022?
Yes, I was very aware of it.
Okay, and is your understanding that the 2022 zoning change that would not impact the industrial uses that historically occurred at this property, correct?
I didn't believe that it should or it would, because that has been a consistent use for going back decades.
Okay. And that the primary use, I'm going to return to this, the primary use of this property was warehousing and industrial with accessory retail, correct?
Correct, yes.
And to conclude your testimony, based upon your reputation in the development business in this community for decades and your interaction with the property, do you believe that this property was historically principally used as a warehouse and industrial operation?
Absolutely, yes.
I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lair. Board questions for Mr. Caruso? Please.
Mr. Caruso, when you purchased the materials, say, for 5 or 6 houses at a time, like you described, was storage of the materials until you needed them a factor in those pricing negotiations up front, or was it a per diem or monthly cost depending on how long your materials were taking up space in their warehouse?
No, it didn't cost us more if they sat there longer, if that's what you're getting at. We would just put an order through for, say, 5 houses, and then as we would need that material, it would be readily available to us.
So in that way, then could the warehousing have been a support function for the sale of those materials if it wasn't a factor in you weren't paying a per diem for the storage? So was the storage just basically a courtesy part of the sale? It was part of the retail operation of you purchasing those materials?
I never really dealt with the retail operation. We dealt with a salesman, and the salesman would place our orders, and as far as I know, all the material was coming and being stored and supplied through the warehouse.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Caruso, you said you were unfamiliar with the retail operation. Did you do
Well, no,
any
I was
hardware
familiar with
shopping
it.
there?
I'm sorry, I was familiar with it from going in the store. Yes,
Uh-huh.
I was familiar with it.
So you did do some shopping there, personal?
Not really. It wasn't like a Home Depot type of store where, you know, on a Saturday I got a little project around the house and I run down to Somerville Lumber to go pick up my needs. I would go to Home Depot for that. And most people would. My experience in going in and out of the retail, which I consider to be ancillary, was that builders such as myself or contractors that would work for us, if, let's say, for example, we were on a job site and my framer was short 10 2x4s or something, and he would say, hey, I need more 2x4s, and I'd call my salesman, he'd say, we have no trucks available. I'd send one of my guys down to the warehouse, down to the retail store, he'd sign an order for 10 2x4s under Northbridge Properties, and then he would back into the warehouse and pick them up.
Thank you.
You mentioned that Somerville Lumber would provide takeoffs of the drawings. You'd provide them the drawings. They'd identify what size windows you'd need. Is that correct?
Yeah, they would look at the drawings, and then they would give me a window list, and then they would give me a price for the windows, or they would do a door list, and they'd give me prices for all the doors in the houses.
Okay, so then is it accurate to say that really they're providing an additional service to warehousing, since really they're kind of, they're really identifying the materials you need based upon a set of plans? They're
Yeah, I
providing
would
almost a
consider
professional
that-
service?
I would consider that a professional, like ancillary type service, yes.
Okay. You also mentioned that excuse me, you would send your home buyers there for for final selection of materials? Would that be
Well, like, for example, if our contracts would provide for Wolf cabinetry. Wolf cabinetry had, let's say, 6 different colors or had like 6 different styles. So they had their ancillary use as a showroom, and I would take the buyer there and I would say, okay, this is the Wolf cabinets, this is the book, this is what it was going to look like, and then they'd say, okay, I want this color or that shape. So it was pretty much just like a place to go as a secondary type use for our buyers.
Understand, but if the showroom was not available, how could your home buyers kind of make their final selections? Like, was that kind of a requirement or reason why you're doing business with Somerville Lumber is because they had that? Like, could you do that in a different way?
We've dealt with other lumber yards throughout the state, and the majority of them have like a small showroom type of thing to sample some of their materials. They would have a section that would have all different types of trim and molding, crown moldings, base moldings, trim moldings with different styles. So I've always found that whatever lumber yard we dealt with, they always had some type of showroom where we could take our buyers to.
To pick up on the question that's being asked by the board member, but the kitchen cabinets, they were there. They were stored on site. They were inventory on the site. Your customer would just go in and say, I want yellow, or
Right.
I want brown, or I want this
Gold, or I
color.
want this design, or I want that color. Yeah,
Correct.
that's it. Yes.
My final question, did you ever store other materials purchased somewhere else there as like an off-site storage location?
No.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on those kitchen cabinet questions and so on. So rather than, as Mr. Laird described, somebody going and say, I want yellow or brown, they might say, that's the model that my builder recommended, and the people in the showroom would be able to show it to them physically, or a catalog that represented perhaps the other color. So there's interaction there between, hopefully, the home buyer, maybe you as a developer, or an agent of yours, or a contractor, who would allow that exchange to take place. In your knowledge, though, could you walk in as a consumer and buy the cabinets yourself
I would think so, yeah. If I wanted to do my kitchen over myself and do the labor myself, I could go in there and say, hey, I like that cabinet. Can you order that for me? And I'm sure they would order it for you, of course.
But your primary experience with Somerville Lumber is as a, what I'll call a commercial developer, somebody who's in the business of professionally developing homes and so on.
Right.
So your view of the business would naturally be skewed by your experience with them.
My personal interaction with that business is based on being a builder and buying in bulk.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
In your experience, picking up on the question asked, is most of your, you've been in the development community a long time in this area.
Correct.
And you know quite a few developers.
Correct.
They all went to Somerville Lumber and did the same thing.
Yes.
Was that their predominant use? Was that developers would come in, order in bulk, the product would be then shipped to your site? They would contact the salesman would go through the same process you
Yes.
went through.
Absolutely, yes.
So your experience is the same with all the developers that
Yes.
you've known?
It was considered to be a builder's supply house, basically.
Okay.
Now, I just have a quick question about what Mr. Silbert referenced in his opening arguments or opening statement, basically citing Lowe's and Home Depot as a contributing factor why Somerville Lumber went out of business. So it sounds like, Mr. Caruso, you're testifying that all your business went through at a wholesale level, used the warehouse. What I'm trying to reconcile back is the eventual closing of Somerville Lumber. Mr. Silbert cited 2 large box retailers. So I'm kind of confused. If this was such a critical service that was, really a cornerstone of commercial development, why did Lowe's and Home Depot even impact that? I'm a little bit confused by that.
Are you going to say something, Mr. Lee?
No.
I'm sorry. You started leaning forward. Can you repeat the question, please?
It's a hard question, and maybe it's something that I should ask one of the owners. But what Mr. Silbert said about Lowe's and Home Depot, they contributed to the reason why Somerville Lumber ultimately closed. Do they provide similar services as Somerville Lumber did? I mean, I'm confused.
I don't buy it.
Reconcile that statement versus your statement.
I've never purchased any bulk houses or projects material from Home Depot. Home Depot to me has always been more of a retail type operation where subcontractors, whether it's a drywall contractor, framing contractor, they'll go there and they'll come out with, a truckload of material. Builders that I know and in my industry have never really purchased bulk.
Well, if Home Depot and Lowe's didn't do those services, why would them proliferating our area contribute to Somerville Lumber's closing?
I don't know about that. I don't know why it would. I know that it's created a big hole and a big vacuum for myself and other people because now we're going to other lumber yards up in Hunterdon County or down in Monmouth County, like we have to buy.
All right, I'll ask that question of the next witness, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, it's a really good question, and we're going to pull that all together.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome.
So, just one, I think. You mentioned that, in your opinion, that Somerville Lumber's primary function was as a warehouse and retail ancillary to that, right?
That's my opinion, yes.
What's your definition of warehouse?
A warehouse is a place to either store materials or to do some type of manufacturing or something of that nature.
So your definition does not include any retail use at all for a warehouse, is that right?
No.
So do you think, in what you witnessed there as a customer, that Somerville Lumber could have survived without any retail component?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, and I'm talking about if you looked at the square footage on the floor plans, those areas where people could come and your customers would go to look at product, whatever. If they didn't have that, they would have still functioned?
I believe so, yeah. I mean,
Still made use of their service?
when my dad purchased his material for his house in 1972, they didn't have a showroom there. It was a warehouse and a lumberyard. And
That's interesting. So back in 1972, there was absolutely no retail component?
not that I was aware of, no. I was very young at the time, but not that I know of.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Questions, Scarlett? No other questions of the board, right? All right, members of the public, questions on Mr. Caruso's testimony? All right, seeing none, back to you, Mr. Lair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one last witness, and then what I'm going to do is let you go home, because it's late, and all I really want to do is call the commercial real estate broker. Then I'm going to bring my planner back at the next available meeting, if you don't mind, because we want to pull everything together for you. And I don't think it would be helpful to start another witness then.
But what would be helpful is if we had the transcript before that.
Of course,
Would
sure,
you be able to do that?
sure.
Thank you.
Mr.
Sounds
Chair,
good. Yes.
since many representations were made, would assume that all of the witnesses would be available to fill in the gaps that are necessary from.
Indeed, yes.
All right, so we're
Thank
going to do a broker, and then witness number 4, the planner, we're going to do at our next available meeting.
Correct.
We'll decide when we wrap up tonight.
Yep,
Sounds good.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Mr. Glick?
Hi. Would you raise your right hand, please? You solemnly swear that the testimony you will give to this board will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Would you state your full name, please, and spell your last name? G-L-I-C-K? Thank you, Mr. Glick. I think you're best seated next to counsel.
Hello, Mr. Glick. Good evening.
Good evening.
You've already stated your name. What I'd like you to do is provide your experience in commercial and industrial real estate transactions and marketing.
Okay, I am a licensed real estate broker with Sheldon Gross Realty. I'm a principal there. I've been working there for I've been specializing in commercial and industrial real estate transactions for over 40 years. I am a member of Society of Industrial and Office Realtors, which is known as SIOR, which it's a global organization of about 3,700 members in 45 countries and 722 cities. I was also I'm a member and a past president of the Industrial and Office Brokers Association in New Jersey.
Were you and your firm retained by Somerville Lumber to market, lease, and/or list its property located at 1468-1480 Route 22?
Yes.
When were you retained?
October 31st, 2019.
And so, have you listed other industrial properties in your career?
Yes.
And how did these compare to Somerville Lumber's property? In other words, did any of those industrial properties contain retail as an accessory use similar to the accessory uses on Somerville Lumber's property?
Yes.
And can you give us an idea? Maybe you have one or two examples?
In Old Bridge, New Jersey, I recently signed a 10-year lease with a company that used to make, the portable office trailers, and they had some little component, like a 10% of accessories for servicing whatever trailers that they did. So it was on 10 acres. It had outside storage and a large warehouse.
Okay. Dealing with the Somerville Lumber site, can you tell us what you were responsible for bringing to this site as a broker? What tenants you were responsible for bringing?
Tenants that could find value in using the building.
And such as?
Well, because of how the building was made and designed, it led to an industrial application. The outside storage component had a variety of different companies that would come through, and we have, I guess, basically 3 different types of buildings. We have a manufacturing building where they used to do the manufacturing of the doors, and we have where the peonies and paint chips are. That's more of a flex type building that could be office and/or warehouse. And then we have the building, that's the east building. That building is more of a large storage area, doesn't have any heat, doesn't have level floors. It doesn't, it has very poor lighting, but it's great for keeping product that can't be stored outside, covered and secured.
What about United Parcel, UPS?
Yeah, they are on the site. They are using parking there.
Okay. And can you provide an overview of your understanding of the historical use of the property up until the 2022 change in zoning?
Oh, through my 40 years in the business, that section of town has always been industrial. I mean, I believe that that was one of the first planned industrial parks across the street. The
And
Chandler's
you're
building.
aware that there's a rail spur that traverses the property, correct?
Correct.
And you were also aware that that trains would unload and load at at the Somerville lumber location,
Oh,
correct?
yes.
You were familiar with the entire history.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you describe the primary uses of the property during that period of time?
Industrial.
Okay?
I don't know many retailers that have a freight train going through the middle of the back of there.
And is that how you advertised this property?
As an industrial application,
Okay.
yes.
Was warehousing a principal component of the property's historical use?
I believe so.
Can you describe the strategies you employed as a broker to market the property to potential tenants?
I advertise with signs. In today's world, it's all internet listing services. There's quite a few of those. And we still do a lot of direct mail campaigns to companies that are in surrounding buildings or close enough by that they might reconsider moving to this location.
Did you emphasize any specific aspects of the property's features?
Yes.
Its layout or its facilities in your marketing materials?
Yes.
Were the terms warehouse, industrial, or related terms used in the property's marketing to describe its potential uses?
Yes.
Did you receive inquiries from potential tenants interested in using the property for warehousing or industrial?
Yes.
Could you share any specific examples of these inquiries?
Yeah. Most recently, we had a rigging company that found great value in the remaining parcel of land that they could use for parking their trucks and some outside equipment. And they thought that this large storage area that didn't have any heat or, good lighting and uneven floors would be ideal for some of their equipment that couldn't necessarily be directly exposed to the elements of weather.
Let's talk about from a real...
Mr. Glick, what company did you say that?
A rigging company. Well, a rigging company and a trucking company. So when some people
What was the first word?
rigging, R-I-G-G-I-N-G.
Okay, I kept hearing reading. Okay.
Sorry.
Reading with bad lighting, that's usually me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you a question that goes to the value. In other words, how does the inability to lease this property to a warehousing tenant affect the property's marketability and potential revenue? In other words, did Somerville Lumber suffer any harm as a result of not being able to lease the property for warehouse user?
So typically what I'll do is we set up our business terms and then we get to the lawyers because, the hourly
Sure.
rate. So when you have the business terms all set up, which we did, and we even went to, I think we got the leases prepared, but then we had it predicated on the zoning and the deal got shot down. And this was a 3-year lease at $45,000 a month net. I think it came out to something like $1,620,000 of revenue that would have been plus. Remember, they would also pick up the expenses of the real estate taxes and maintenance of the property, so I consider that a pretty big loss for them.
If not for the principal warehousing and industrial uses, what can this property be leased for?
I think it could be unleasable.
So, in your opinion, this property without a warehouse, the primary use being warehousing and industrial, it's your opinion it would be unleasable?
Very few uses would fit in there for, let's say, a retail use. The only thing that comes to mind is, I'm probably older than everyone in the room, Great Eastern turned into a flea market. I think a flea market could work there. That might be a retail use.
Have you, in your experience, have you ever come across a property with a similar layout as this. And it is different. And it's in its configuration. That was not intended to be primarily housing, warehouse, and industrial uses.
I'm sorry, I lost you on that
In
question.
other words, have you ever come across a property like this that was not intended primarily to house warehousing?
No.
Okay. Can you provide an estimate of how much the property was allocated for warehousing in relation to the entire property as part of your marketing?
Oh, I feel as though that property, 90% of it is an industrial application with office for supporting it, and the remaining amount could be an accessory retail or showroom.
At any time, in your experience, did the property lease over 20% of its space for retail?
No.
Okay. Based upon your experience and the evidence presented, do you believe that the property was historically marketed for principal warehousing and industrial use?
Yes.
And in your professional opinion, based upon the historical use and your interactions with potential tenants, it was warehousing?
Yes.
In your professional opinion, should the property's historical use be considered as principal warehousing?
Yes.
Based upon your experience, do the definitions, and I'm going to read them to you, accurately describe the operations that existed on this property? Number one, a distribution center with on-site retail, which is a distribution center that primarily functions as a hub for storing, sorting, and shipping goods. The facility may have a small retail store or showroom where customers can purchase products. That's identified as a distribution center with on-site retail.
Yes.
How about storage warehouse with retail sample showroom, which is a storage warehouse used for temporary storage of goods or materials, and a small retail showroom with warehouse where customers can view product samples and place orders?
Yes.
I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lair, I have a question of those definitions you just asked. Are they from some legal book that has an authority on this?
It came from a definition there's a book by Harvey Moskowitz on development definitions. And you may have heard of it. I read those
today.
Yeah, I read those definitions directly from that book.
Gotcha. That was my question. Thank you very much. Members of the board, questions?
Just have a quick question. When you describe the potential tenant, and we're trying to quantify a financial loss to the appellant, are you suggesting that for some reason this procedure has caused them some financial harm, or were the cause of that tenant walking away? I'm not sure what you were trying to tell us.
Well, he asked me the question. I didn't
Right.
offer it. So I could tell you that, you know, I do this a lot. I do this in a lot of different towns, and we're constantly trying to keep these buildings leased and rented for anything, any type of, type of property, if it's retail or, but I think what happens is, when you have somebody who you think fits the bill, and we go through all the effort to do it, go to town and say, hey, it looks just like the other use that we had, and they say, no, it's a big blow to an owner. It's not.
That's why we're here.
Yeah.
Discussing this and potentially looking to render a decision one way or another. But I wasn't clear as to whether you were saying that because at this moment in time, no decision has been made that cost your client some money.
It definitely cost them that amount of money that I said.
And so are you then representing that we're somehow liable for damages to that effect?
I'm a real estate broker.
No, if I meant that, I apologize. There is no liability whatsoever that I am suggesting is on the township, on the zoning board. It's just factual loss based upon the fact that a decision was rendered. That tenant walked away. But I'm not in any way accusing, blaming, suggesting that the township is any way liable. No.
Thank you.
Mr. Glick, is it common that tenants are interested in a property and they end up walking away or not closing on the transaction?
Well, I can go one by one, but, you know, is it?
Generally, does it happen that you have tenants that look at a property, like it, maybe have potential want to enter into a lease, and for whatever reason, they don't? Does that happen in your industry?
So when we get to the point where I mentioned that we had an offer and acceptance letter, we had all the business terms down, we had a lease prepared, and the reason why I didn't move forward in this case was because the town wouldn't permit their use.
I didn't ask.
But no, but you're right.
Yeah.
The answer is, you're right. They don't always make every deal.
Thank
I have one other question for Mr. Lair. Were there any other definitions in this Moskowitz book that perhaps describe the property differently than the two you chose?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Scarlett, please.
Yes, I have two questions. You indicated that the zone was changed and the removal of the warehouse use affected your ability to lease this property, rent this property, sell this property. Did you look at all of the options for zoning? You made a very strong statement, but did you explore the zoning ordinance to see whether or not there were other options and explore those options before testifying that was the issue that you had to overcome?
No,
Why not?
because I didn't.
Would it be a better alternative to go back to the ordinance and see whether there is a particular option for the Somerville lumber lots and the one next door for Bridgewater Accessory Associates that would have greatly enhanced the development should an effort have been made to attempt and fail or attempt and succeed in a negotiation? Would that be something that you should have looked at?
So there was a lot of parts to that statement that I want to make sure that I don't go off the rails on that, right? So you'll help me with it. So, you know, you work every day, we work in a lot of towns. I don't have every town's zoning ordinances memorized, and quite honestly, this was really a shock to me that it even happened with the idea that we had a press release about the new warehouse going up right next door, and it didn't say, and wow, were we lucky that we got our paperwork in before everyone else. You know, to me, that was like, you know, and I sort of like got the wind out of my sails because I'm out there trying to get them tenants, and the new warehouse is going up, and now I'm going to go back and study your new zoning codes. So I didn't do that, and I want to tell you that.
Suggest that it's not new zoning. It's been in the ordinance book for probably about 8 years, 5 years. And it's an option that does require negotiations. I'm sure that.
I'm not familiar with what you're saying.
Let me ask a question a different way, if I might.
Go ahead.
I'm not answering this right.
I know what the zoning ordinance says is a permitted use prior to October of 2022. A trucking terminal,
I market to them.
a manufacturing facility?
I market to them.
Would it lend itself to a professional and service office?
Yeah, a small portion of it, because we do have offices.
How about a multimedia production such as graphic design and web-based services?
I don't see why not.
How about research laboratories and research facilities?
That would require a great deal of capital from what's existing there, because the building is not set up for that.
How about an adult medical daycare facility?
Again, we don't have the infrastructure for that, but I haven't, you know.
Based upon what you've seen in these pictures, and as board members have seen, a nursing home?
Never.
Assisted living facility?
Never.
An indoor commercial recreation facility?
A lot of pickleball inquiries, let me tell you, but we don't have a level floor, we don't have good lighting, we don't have heat, we don't have a sprinkler system in that building.
That's all.
So I do go through that list, so I didn't understand your question.
How about restaurants and hotels?
Ms. Doyle, you know that that is only allowed as a conditional use if we combine the property with the Denholt site.
I did say it would require negotiations and an attempt with a failure or a success.
Those negotiations did take place.
It may fail, but the point is that it was not mentioned as an option, that it was accepted and rejected or whatever. You encapsulated it only to serve your application here. There is another option that the board may not even know about because it hasn't been brought up at the meeting, and saying we attempted to negotiate and failed.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to tell you what she's talking about. There is an option. It's what I would call an overlay zone, where if my client negotiated with Mr. Denholtz, and they all got together and they built a
And that's the property that went to the planning board that's most to the east.
right, and if he came together with them and they were able to come up with some deal, they could put a convention center there with restaurants and retail, but that's a pipe dream. That is ancient history.
And that is what I would have liked to have given to the board, so that in testimony, because it's a pipe dream from, and he's very well aware of the client, but it's a pipe dream that he says, but he doesn't give you proof of such a thing. You didn't even know that it was possible. You didn't know what efforts had been made to talk to Denholtz. You didn't know whether or not Denholtz had ever approached.
Why would that even be relevant to a Section 68 case?
The reason that I'm bringing it up is because it was mentioned that this is the zone that we're dealing with. And it is the zone we're dealing with, except there's an option that you didn't divulge.
It's no longer viable as an option because Mr. Denholtz got an approval and for his property, and there were negotiations. I was part of those negotiations.
Well, now
Maybe I should be a fact witness.
Now you're providing the information that they don't have, except it's just coming out now.
Yeah, but
That's
Scarlett,
all I'm asking is a transparent.
I'm just not sure what it has to do
I
with it.
think we should just move to the next
Okay.
topic.
Next
It's
question-
not relevant.
The next question I have, sir, is that you mentioned a bit of the history, and you talked about a manufacturing building. Would you explain in the history what did they do? How long ago was it, if you're aware?
Okay, so the little that I know is that Building 2, which is the west building, in the back, when I got the listing, there were still manufacturing equipment there to work on doors. And
Doors.
create doors. So they made doors back there that I know of. I might be misspoken, but that was my
It wasn't
jump to that.
for cabinetry or any of that? It was, to your knowledge, it was?
So,
Okay, so it was cabinetry and doors, millwork kind of
yeah.
work. Okay, thank you. I don't know that the board got that earlier.
I don't know, but I don't care because people from the audience can't answer a question. So
Well, he
if
testified
we
that it
need
was.
someone who's qualified to answer the
Yeah.
question if we want an answer.
Well, I think it's up to the board, but I think the board would like to know if there was manufacturing going on in the building, for what? And it was for the woodworking.
I didn't hear an answer because we don't have a witness that testified to that, so.
I may have to bring up,
Well, we had the original witness who indicated there was milling
Mr.
that
Pettit
went on.
did mention it, but I don't want to speak for him.
there was milling. Mr. Pettit did indicate that there was milling and manufacturing going on at the site.
Oh, he used the word manufacturing. Okay, just didn't know that.
Mentioned
Thank you.
molding as well, moldings, yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct.
And I have no other questions.
All right, thank you very much, Scarlett. There's no other board questions. I'd like to open up to members of the public for Mr. Glick's testimony. All right, seeing none, Mr. Lair, we have, it's 10 o'clock. So our next meeting, just for the board's information, is September 12th. For you, unfortunately, the next available spot is not until October 24th. I know you're a busy man. Is that going to work with you and your client to continue this case and bring back your planner and wrap up your testimony?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that's the only available date that you have, right?
Oh, we can go after.
No, earlier. Okay.
Yeah, we have a full docket, unfortunately.
No, Chairman, I've been doing this for a long time, and when the chairman says this is the best we can do, I'm not going to challenge it.
Scarlett is my rock. She keeps it in her planner. She showed me her planner. Both of the meetings subsequent to this There's two cases.
Can I just ask my witnesses if they'll all be here?
Take your time.
Yes, that's fine, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so we're going to continue this case.
So for members of the public, this case is being adjourned and will continue on October 24th, 2023 at 7 PM in this room with no further notice.
And Mr. Chairman, just for the advice of the applicant, because this is we're going to do an accounting of the escrow, there might be a slight request.
Yeah, you can be in touch with me, that's no problem.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lair.
Thank you, Mr. Lair. Good seeing you.
And the transcript, Jeff, if you would.
Great. Other board business we took care of with T-Mobile, and with that, our next meeting is in this room, 7 PM, September 12th, 2023. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
I move.
Mr. Wiley and then Mr. Lespiza. All right, thank you, everyone. Good night.